airplane, so I'm grateful I was on an airplane.
What's going on here? Yep.
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay, we're at, the only issue is, we're audio on Zoom. They cannot see us. We can't change it. It's sort of got set up incorrectly.
Do you need a minute yet, or,
Yeah, we can't figure it out.
so you want to go ahead and proceed?
Yes.
All right,
They'll be able to hear us.
thank you. We'll call the meeting to order at 7 PM. Madam Clerk, may I have a roll call, please?
So committee member Solomon.
Here.
Committee member Ruocco.
Here.
Committee member Nyren.
Here.
Committee member Pinsler.
Here.
Committee member Tabaris. Okay, thank you. And then committee member Wonderly and Duiziak are absent. And Chair Stressenberg, sorry.
Here. Thank you. Ms. Morocco, would you lead us in a salute to the flag, please?
Please rise and face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is someone contacting Wayne? Because very often he's here anyway.
This way.
He's here anyway sometimes, so.
Yeah, I talked to him earlier today. He said he was probably not going to come tonight just because he was busy with some other things, so
Shall I text?
I think we're okay. We have quorum.
Member Quinn.
Can I have a motion to approve the order of agenda?
Can I ask a question about the agenda
You may.
generally? Well, there's a couple of things that should have been on the agenda that weren't, and I don't know, this is to the city clerk. Is there a reason that some of the things that were supposed to be on the agenda aren't?
We went over it with the city attorney, and this is what was put on there, and then we're gonna, since the resolution hasn't gone back to council yet, and then I have a listing of those other items so that we can put those onto the next agenda.
Which resolution hasn't?
The resolution for the charter review advisory.
The school board
It was
thing?
supposed to go back to council to update it.
The resolution creating this committee?
Correct,
Okay, yeah, because the latest one is the June 14th one that's online.
correct.
Okay.
And we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Okay, then I'll move to approve the order.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask if we could move item I1 to follow item J1, please.
Okay, so there's a motion to move I1 until after J1. Is
Yes.
there a second for that?
I'll second that.
Motion second, all in favor? Aye. And any opposed? Okay, so done. And we'll come back to some of the other comments. I think you said you wanted to comment on the resolution and everything a little bit later. Or?
Yeah, that will be under future agenda topics. Yeah, exactly.
Can I make a motion to approve the order of the agenda
As amended.
as amended?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, there we have it. Any blue folder items this evening?
Now for this agency or committee, excuse me.
Whatever we are this week.
You know.
For our consent calendar, any Zoom or e-comments for consent calendar?
I'm sorry. I'm doing everything now. We've gotten into doing everything. Let's see. I have no Zoom and no e-comments.
Anyone
None for the record.
Would anyone like to pull any items from the consent calendar?
Yes, I would like to pull item F2, all 3 minutes.
Okay, is there a second for that?
I don't think it needs a second.
Yeah, you're right, doesn't need a second. We just do, you pull that. Okay, so kind of a motion, a second to approve item F1.
So moved.
Second.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Mr. Rocco for item F2. Comments?
I'm going to request that we as a group table the minutes till the next meeting. We got 3 of them sent to us this time around. Very few days to review. They have a lot of detail, and as we've been doing with reviewing some of the items, we look at prior minutes as kind of the guide of how it's going. But given the amount of detail, I would like at least an opportunity to listen to the audio tape as I review the minutes with it. So I'm hoping that there will be a second to table it to the next meeting and affirmative vote to table it as well.
Okay, I was going to add a comment on F2, especially for the city clerk's office. These are incredible minutes. I've read through them all. They are phenomenal. The level of detail, because that really is our record. It's hard to go back and watch the videos and things like, but the minutes are probably the best I've ever seen. I'm not sure who put those together, but they deserve a big thanks because they really are well done.
Good. And then I know we have the October 25th coming. I had to send that back because that had to be, there were some things that didn't make sense. So that went back.
Okay.
So get that.
Yeah.
So because we didn't make sense, or they didn't make sense.
That's a question.
No, it was, yeah, I think the minute secretary
It could be both.
was having a hard time. And so I sent that back to get redone.
I'm okay with approving the ones that are
I am
here.
too.
I've gone through them. Is there a second for the motion to table them?
I'll make a second to that motion.
Okay, so there's a motion and second. I'm going to go ahead and do a substitute motion to approve everything tonight.
I will second that.
I'm going to abstain from approving.
Okay.
How's this work? Is it the second? I assume you would postpone the next meeting.
You would prefer, okay. So
I would give them an opportunity to listen to the minutes.
we have a substitute motion and a second. We'll just vote on that. All in favor of approving the F2 this evening? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, fails 2-3 with 1 abstaining. So then it goes back to the motion of
Table.
putting them to the next agenda for approval. And there's a motion and second for that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
You abstaining?
No, I'm fine voting
Okay,
aye
okay,
for,
For that one, you're okay.
yeah, for that one, I'm okay.
Okay, so that's unanimous then.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excluded consent calendar items, we have none. Public participation on non-agenda items. Do we have any Zoom or e-comments for non-agenda?
Okay, we have, yes, Steve Chesson. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. My name's Steve Chesson. I'm president of Californians for Electoral Reform, excuse me, and a nationally recognized expert on ranked choice voting, or RCV. I participated in educating the city council on the advantages of ranked choice voting, and I'm helping with a campaign in support of Charter Amendment CA5 on the March ballot that would change Redondo Beach's city office elections to use ranked choice voting. While it isn't on tonight's agenda, I understand that the city council has asked you to consider removing the Redondo Beach Unified School District from the city charter so that it would be governed by general law instead. I would ask that you delay that consideration until after the March election. In March, the voters will decide if they want to use ranked choice voting in future city elections. If they decide in favor, then it would only be natural to consider whether the Redondo Beach Unified School District Board of Education should also be elected using ranked choice voting, whether using the at-large proportional form, as does the Albany Unified School District, or the single winner form within trustee areas, as does the Oakland Unified School District. But that can only be done if the Board of Education remains in the charter, as general law school boards cannot be elected using ranked choice voting. I note that many people, including some RCV supporters, are unaware that RCV can be used in at-large elections. In fact, the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, has been using the at-large proportional form of ranked choice voting to elect both its city council and its school board since the 1940s. I will be happy to explain to you how both the single winner form and the at-large proportional form of ranked choice voting work at a suitable time. deciding whether to change the school board elections to either form of ranked choice voting should probably be done in consultation with the existing Redondo Beach School Board, but the option to do so requires that the Board of Education remain in the charter. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, either this evening or when your discussion of Article 16 of the charter takes place. I appreciate your giving me this time to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will make a brief clarification that I believe that inherently school board election is like a ranked choice because it does not require a majority, is simply the top vote getters.
Correct, the top vote.
So ranked choice voting, I don't believe would do anything for school board the way we do it. Okay, so that clarifies that.
I would respectfully disagree. I would like the opportunity to
It's not
explain.
exactly the same.
Okay.
It's not on tonight's agenda anyway,
Yeah,
so.
so we can't talk.
Right.
Right.
When it becomes on your agenda, I would love to discuss it with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other or Zoom comments?
Let's see. No comments.
Okay. So moving on now to item I2, continued from previous agenda, discussion of possible action regarding Article 11, Section 11 on the city clerk.
We are back to the Moss Adams issue. And if we can look at Moss Adams, the issue with the city clerk, and we're not dealing with elected or appointed, and this is not that issue. It's about the listing of the requirements of the city clerk, not only for education requirements that are in there, but the work that the city clerk does, particularly associated with the budget, and where that belongs. And I believe that the Moss Adams report, as well as other comments that have been made, indicate that that should be, that part of the requirements or the responsibilities of the city clerk should be removed and limited to the, let me find the particular areas. It starts with Section 11, and it's mostly Section F. Have charge of the administration of the financial affairs of the city under the direction of the city manager. Prepare and assemble budget expense and capital estimates. Supervise all expenditures and disbursements to ensure the budget appropriations are not exceeded. Provide and maintain a general accounting system for the city government in each of its offices. Supervise the maintenance of current inventories of all real property, real and personal, by the respective officers. Submit to the city council a monthly statement of all receipts and disbursements in sufficient detail to show the exact financial condition of the city. To approve, accept as to correctness together with the city manager before bills, payments, all bills, invoices, payrolls, and charges against the city government. Then it goes on, no person shall be eligible if they didn't have at least 15 units of accounting. That section, at least according to the Moss Adams report, is in opposition to the actual structure and function of the city. And it would seem that that part it's timely to remove that and place that, those things where it belongs, which is with a financial director of the city. So that's where this whole thing is. We're not talking about appointed versus elected. That, you know, among the charter cities in California, more of them elect a city clerk than any other of the three jobs: attorney, clerk, treasurer. And it does make sense. Although the electing of a city clerk every other year puts the city clerk responsible for their own election in terms of managing it, supervising it. So that could be considered a conflict of interest. I've never, in the time I've been associated with the city, seen that as a problem. but it could be. So that's a possible reason for turning it into an appointed position as opposed to an elected. But that's, again, not what this discussion is about. This is about the specificity that was highlighted in the Moss Adams report to change those sections of this charter that is not the way we run the city these days. And as we will discuss with many other things, this city charter, which is preserved in amber, doesn't necessarily represent the way modern cities' governments work. So that's really the issue that's on the table, I believe, with this. This is not the first time we've talked about this. There have been previous times to try to change this, but I think it's become even more acute because of the physical way that cities operate. And it's changed over time, and this is the time, I believe, to change it. So at any rate, I'll open that up to discussion.
I have a question. Yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at the Moss Adams report, and for those who are following along, it's under the city treasurer.
Which page are you on?
I'm on page 8 of the Moss Adams report.
Is there a PDF page?
I'm looking at the bottom.
Actually, they're both there.
Page
Both
11
in
of
both.
50.
If you go to page 9, it brings in some of the city clerk's roles.
Right, but this is the best practice. This is page 11 of 50 on the Moss Adams report. But it talks about government code sections 40801 through 40814, which specify that the city clerk is the accounting officer of the city, shall maintain records of financial conditions of the city, including financial reports that are publicly made available. So it does talk about that you can transfer the power to the director of finance, and I assume that that's what you're suggesting is that we transfer it.
Mm-hmm.
I got this off of when I went to the treasurer stuff, it was one of the things listed out.
Yeah, so you're not in the agenda packet, or?
I am in the agenda
It's in
packet.
the agenda packet.
It's
but
part of the
happens to be-
agenda packet.
It happens to be under the,
I3.
the section that deals with the city treasurer, because the Moss Adams report dealt with both.
Right.
So that's where it actually resides.
It's also in the city clerk under blue folder,
Okay. Well,
so it's on both.
it's titled best practices, which is, I assume, the way you're going with this, Mr. Kinsler. So I just wanted to clarify that even though it's mentions it in the government code as being part of the city clerk, you're suggesting that we transfer all the duties to a director of finance.
The operational part, much of this that's stated in here is operational.
Yeah, if I could drill down a little bit onto that. So thank you, Mr. Pinsler. So the end of that section, that paragraph from which Mr. Morocco is reading from states, however, the government code also states that the financial and accounting duties imposed on a city clerk may be transferred to a director of finance when the office has been established and its powers and duties defined by ordinance. Most cities choose to delegate this authority to improve the efficiency of operations and ensure proper utilization of staff skills and expertise. With specificity, the Moss Adams report is asking us to clarify these roles to avoid a potential of ambiguity and a situation where we might have controversy or confusion over the roles and responsibilities between the city clerk's office and the finance department as it pertains to our current operations. Their suggestion specifically was two things. Either delegate all clerk-assigned financial responsibilities to the financial services department and eliminate the financial education requirements from the charter. And this is from the recommendations on page 9 of the roles and responsibilities of the Moss Adams report. Or transition the clerk's role to serve a strategic function within the city by assuming an oversight role over expenditure functions, including conducting activities such as approval of policies and procedures, journal entry review, and expenditure analysis to identify regular transactions. I should further note, please, or highlight that the city has also, this is part on page 9 of the report, has not documented the delegation of these tasks in code or policy, which results in heightened liability risk and potential confusion regarding roles and responsibilities of levels of authority. So later on in the report, as an addendum, it's addendum A on page, beginning on page 18 of the Moss Adams report, addendum A. It has some examples of what other cities have done, such as Santa Monica, Pasadena, have done to go ahead and clarify or otherwise define this role, or the role between the city clerk's office specifically and the finance office. And here for Santa Monica on page 18, they have 707, a specificity with regard to the city clerk powers and duties. Mainly what the clerk's offices do throughout the state of California, if you visit the City Clerks Association of California's website and their description of clerk's duties, it mainly focuses the clerk's duties on, notwithstanding what our clerk does, because they are, Ms. Manzano is involved in a lot of our oversight right now in checking, overseeing checks, making sure they match up, catching situations where a bill might have been getting paid twice and things that otherwise might have been missed without that oversight role. The City Clerks Association of California focuses on the responsibilities as administering federal, state, and local procedures through which government representatives are selected, a records manager, maintaining and indexing the minutes, ordinances, and resolutions adopted by the legislative body, also ensuring that municipal records are readily accessible to the public or public records requests. According to the CCAC, or at least in their description, they don't have a lot of financial involvement for the city clerk. They seem to direct that involvement towards the financial services department. So now going from the minutia back up to the 10,000 foot view, as Mr. Pinsler was experiencing, this is something that we would want to clarify because the roles and responsibilities are not adequately clarified according to an auditor that we hired within the charter. We have examples from Moss Adams within the ordinances from other cities within the region as to perhaps language that might be used. And it brings us back to something that we've discussed many times, which is the educational requirements, the 15 hours or so of accounting required in our charter to hold this role. I would suggest that, or think that, put it out there for discussion, the idea that if we are going to assign most, if not all, within the charter of the financial duties to the financial services department and delineate that within the charter, that perhaps that requirement would even be more of an artifact than unnecessary. It's certainly not uniformly applied to other roles within the city. There is a city attorney's office that has some practice requirements. I think it's 5 years of practice for the city attorney's office, but other offices within the city don't have that sort of financial requirement. Certainly if you hire a financial director, you want them to have some background, and the job description would include that, but not for other elected officers beyond the city attorney. So it would be, I would open for discussion the idea of, one, as Mr. Pinsler has noted, do we want to continue the education requirement? Two, do we want to begin drilling down on some of the specificity of how we might amend the charter using one of the other ordinances or charter, if there are ordinances within the appendix there as a guide? I would note that the Moss Adams report indicates that this can be done either by ordinance or by charter amendment. So they are both available to us. And I'll just leave those comments after drilling down on this particular part of it out open for the panel discussion, please.
Mr. Pinsler?
Yeah, if I could, one of the things I don't think we want to do is to create a charter statement about financial director. This is something that once in the charter becomes an artifact. And it's, as we've seen, it's difficult to change. That should be something that is created by ordinance or by a resolution of the city council as to how this, or leave to the city manager to create a financial services director, department, however he wants to do it, because 10 years from now, it may change, or 20 years from now, it may change. And then we have to go back through another election cycle to change the charter. But the issue here is that that responsibility should be in the primary purview of the city manager. Therefore, all this stuff that is stated here for the city clerk creates a dual path for the financial management of the city. And by removing this from the charter would help streamline the city manager's ability to set up a proper financial services management structure. So that's why my recommendation would be to remove subsection F and in total, and if it needs to be changed by the city council can do it.
Mr. Morocco.
First, I did want to note for the minutes that Mr. Craig is present, so he's part of this discussion. Second, this is more directed to you, Ms. Manzano. In your opinion, is the system, the way the city clerk's office, broken? And then the second question, when Moss Adams did this report, did they spend any time interviewing you and your staff as far as your responsibilities?
Yes, Moss Adams did interview, well, not my staff, but interviewed me. And the other thing is, it's sort of hard to say whether there's, things that are missing. I mean, because, there's a lot of shortage of staff. So there are things that, everybody's always dealing with fires. And so there's certain things that are not being done from my point of view as an accountant. And there's things that I'm doing that sort of just things that I'm trying to catch going through bills, but that, that's what I have. That's what it says in the charter. There's no finance director right now. So right now they're working with trying to get year end because of new GASB reporting. So, so each month is a different thing based on, what I can do related to accounting. So, I mean, I get along with everyone, so there's no issues. But there's been prior city managers, or actually one city manager, which was not last one, the one before, who we were always butting heads because they wouldn't provide me the information to review. And like I mentioned to him, I'm not interested in taking over finance, which I can, because I have a background. I want to be a part of it because that's per my charter. So there's times where some city managers are willing to work with me and some city managers aren't. And that's where there's going to be times where city managers don't agree with the city clerk if they have the background, but then there's times they do. So it just really depends on the mix-up of the chemistry of the two people. From my point of view, the check and balance, I think it does need to be a little bit more clear, but the checks and balance need to be there. Because technically, if you give it all to the finance director, now you have the finance director and the city manager doing whatever they need to do without somebody from the public, so to speak, that's what I represent, to be able to go in and look and see that what they're doing is above board. And you can do it both ways, but.
If I could, excuse me just 1 second. What we're discussing here is not Eleanor.
We're correct. And want to make that clear. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not.
We're not discussing you.
No, I'm talking about the
Yeah.
position.
But you're giving your purview of how it's been going.
Right,
The fact of what you're doing isn't necessarily what the next person who's sitting in that seat would do.
That's correct. 'Cause
And what we're trying to do here is to figure out how to make the structure work better.
Right. No, I understand what you're saying.
This is not about you.
That's why I'm saying.
And that my question wasn't directed, it's trying to find out if this is a real problem, is the system broken? And what Ms. Manzano explained, and actually I'm more curious now, if there's no finance director in place, what's the backup system if you're not doing the finance stuff?
Well,
Well,
we
there's-
have an acting
Yeah,
finance
we have an
director.
acting finance director. I'm just saying that right now we don't have a finance director, but it puts a lot of pressure for that department because they're trying to get a lot of things taken care of, year end, things like that. And then there was a new GASB, which now, brings it further down,
Yeah, GASB 87
which is the
requirements.
leases.
And then you've got, we do have an acting finance director, and then you have, I beg your pardon, Eleanor. We do have an acting finance director, and we also have our previous finance director, Marnie Rulin, who's been coming in and helping us
Helping out.
bootstrap this problem right now.
Right.
So triaging what we have in the office. But I think, if I may,
And I just,
I think Ms. Manzano's comments kind of highlight the difficulties that these roles and responsibilities are not very well defined. And it's sort of an Alexander Haig moment, who's in charge? Am I in charge? Are you in charge? What's happening here? What's happening there? That could further be narrowed down or defined within either a municipal code by ordinance and taking it out of the charter, so removing that section, or by amending the charter using some of the guidelines that we have in the ordinances that were presented as alternatives. I think that what we've heard kind of highlights the need, quite frankly, for the better definitions within the language that we have now.
I also see that that the city clerk should have some kind of oversight. That's how I see it, from my point of view. I mean, I understand where you're going for the education, that, if you have some kind of oversight or the city clerk has some kind of background of accounting, then they should be able to oversight some of this suggestions that even Moss Adams mentioned.
I would agree with you that it's important, that oversight function of double checking the invoices and the billing. I would agree with that, and that could be incorporated into the roles of the clerk as an oversight, and if we needed with further specificity, reviewing billing or invoices and things along those lines.
Well, I even like the suggestion regarding journal entries. I think that would be great, because to me, that would get more into some of the stuff, and then, some of the accounting.
That's an accounting function.
Yeah, accounting function. And then there's one more other thing. Oh, the other thing that's in the municipal code that I don't think you realize is that I also, as a city clerk, have to review the travel from the council. So I have to sign off on that. So there are certain areas in the municipal code that I'm required to do as my position. So that's a good check and balance. Make sure council's not off, doing a lot of traveling. Not a lot of traveling, but, traveling that should not be.
So is this the P cards and reimbursements that are presented?
Not P cards, they're actual travel. Anywhere they're going, if they're going anywhere to travel.
You're
I
the
have to-
travel agent for the council members.
I have to approve it before it gets paid.
Okay.
See, you guys don't know that, but that's in the municipal code. So there's certain things that I have a requirement to do and they bring those travel expense reports to me to sign off, because that is what municipal code says.
Mr. Myers.
Yeah. I'm wondering, we described the City Clerks Association of California. Is the role as described in the Redondo Beach Charter an anomaly? Like when, in your fellow clerks cohort, is your role particularly unique? Because, my experience with city clerks is that it is more like records and elections based and not so much, accounting and finance. So, I'm inclined to agree that, that's a role that should be refined and more clearly delineated. But I'm just wondering, how does it compare to your peers in other cities?
It just, all in California, it's just, there are a few of us, but there are some cities that do finance. city clerk I know in Whittier who does IT, and there's another city clerk that does HR. So it just really depends on the city and how it was set up. So there are city clerks that do other roles than just city clerk.
Okay,
as
but
you-
you do agree that like city clerk, in a traditional sense, a city clerk role would not typically include the financial element.
You know, I've only been city clerk for here, but I mean, going to association, yeah, majority do just city clerk. I mean,
More
majority of them
traditional,
don't even do elections. There's hardly some of them that don't even do elections. I mean, I know the county does the elections now for all the cities. You know, and even before then, some of them, a lot of city clerks didn't know elections.
Part of that is because the companies that used to do it have gone out of business.
Did a lot of it.
So.
But a lot of it
county's
turned
the
it
only
over.
option.
But there were some that weren't doing the full service company, and they were just doing the county. They would just turn over, the county would do everything.
And with regard to the education requirements, I would be inclined to say that it's insufficient. If in fact the clerk has this level of financial responsibility, I think that to say 15 units in
Yes,
accounting, I
that's
mean,
true.
that's nothing.
That's true.
So I would say if we're going to keep it, then we need to elevate the education requirement. But I'm more inclined to say that it needs to be removed.
Yeah, 'cause that's, well, I mean, one of the things I'm planning is to create reports or more reports to better analyze, because that's some of the other thing is I do reports that analyze some of the things related to finance so that it helps me as the city clerk of the oversight. So those are the kind of things. And so,
If I could ask, are you doing a lot of these things in the absence of a formal finance director structure? Or,
I do it whether we have a finance director or
Well,
not.
you said you have it under charter, because
Right.
when you have section F, the way it's worded, you have charge of the administration of the financial affairs of the city. However, then it says under the direction of the city manager. So you are in charge of it, but the city manager for that aspect is in charge of what you do with it in a way. And
Right.
that's somewhat ambiguous.
Well, I think it's because of the past. I mean, the past, what used to happen is the finance used to be under the city clerk. And then it went back where they put it under the city manager. And then it came back. It might have been, I don't know if it was during your time, but it did go back under the city clerk. And I think it just depends on the city manager.
it was John Oliver who had that responsibility.
Correct.
The person before him was the one who put the accounting requirement into the
Into the city.
he was
City clerk.
clerk for 30 years or something like that.
Right. And so then what happened was, I think when the next city clerk came in, they didn't get along with the city treasurer, the council, and didn't get along with the city manager. So they decided to take it out and put it to under the city manager.
So big picture, I believe I'm seeing a consensus of the committee that yes, some changes need to be done to the roles and responsibilities. Is that a fair statement?
I believe so.
So we agree upon that. Now it's getting down to what are those changes and really get into specifying them. And if we're going to remove something, does it need to go somewhere else? And do we move it under a section that exists? Do we have to create a new role? You know, for example, the Santa Monica one had the city controller, I believe, which we don't have. Okay, Mr. Solomon.
Yeah, the city controller or financial officer, but we don't have a financial officer identified in the charter. To answer your question, I would point to, again, the Appendix A, I think would be a good starting point. On section 20, page 21, the Santa Monica ordinance, it was 2.12.270, city clerk title and responsibilities. And it has a section A and then a section B. And then in section B, items 1 through 9. So I would suggest that some of these things probably blend with what our current clerk's office does, and we would hope that it would continue to do, such as direct, plan, and manage the activities of the Records and Election Services Department, maintaining records, administering the elections, compliance with the Political Reform Act. I don't know Ms. Manzano, I don't know that that's a role that you have right now. There's no compliance with FPPC or anything. That gets referred to the FPPC, right?
Right, but now, I mean, we're looking at if there's any 460, because we have an ordinance now.
Right, we have a campaign finance ordinance. So and that was something that was debated rather emphatically during city council meetings.
Multiple times.
Multiple times. So how is it, if you could clarify the latest of it, if you know, if there is an allegation of a violation of our local campaign finance rules, does that get to an administrative review, not through the city attorney's office, but through the police department? Or is it still the city attorney's office?
We haven't, that hasn't been defined yet.
But it definitely hasn't been something where they've looked to Mr. Webb.
Appears as if magically.
It has never been with the city attorney's office. And as I've said emphatically, we don't investigate cases that we then prosecute, as that would be a conflict. So
If I may, the language says ensure compliance with the Political Reform Act.
yeah, well, just it's not with us. We do prosecution. There's a provision that we discussed before under state law, the PRA, that an elected city attorney in a charter city can prosecute violations of the PRA. The difficulty has been there's been no one to investigate the cases to bring them to us. And
Yep, the reason that I asked, I'm sorry, please go
So
ahead.
for us, what we do is we just make sure people are, putting in their 460s in on the deadline. If not, we have to pursue them. And then after a certain point, we send them to the FPPC for enforcement.
So,
That's really all
and
we're doing.
if I may, and then there's a further complication. There's a new law that amended the Political Reform Act this year, where if a council member or mayor takes $250 or more,
right.
they can't act on anything from that individual
And they
that
have
would
to
benefit them for a period of time, and they have to recuse
Return-
12
themselves.
months.
Or returning within 30 days.
Right, and that enforcement will be done by the FPPC. And currently, as long as we have an elected city attorney, then they will refer prosecution, criminal prosecution, to the city attorney. If that no longer is the case, they won't be able to do that, and they'll have administrative enforcement.
I wasn't looking to interrupt what you were doing, your work you were doing.
Okay.
It was more specifically to the idea that perhaps this section of the Santa Monica Code that says ensure compliance with the Political Reform Act was more specific to the filing forms rather than any kind of, and he's gone, any kind of enforcement or other investigations. That's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, we just manage and coordinate the forms to make sure they're in. And then it's not just the campaign, it's also the Form 700s, which is conflict of interest forms. So we make sure that everybody's complied to that.
That's probably why this item 4 is here, ensure compliance with the Political Reform Act, and then with accordance to a further section here with specificity of the forms that you're talking about. Okay. So there are a number of things here I think would be a good baseline. We could compare and contrast those with what's in the charter, and then perhaps come up with some ideas of what may or may not be included, or I think a bigger picture of whether or not we even want to continue to have it in the charter or have it controlled by ordinance. Meaning that's the clerk's roles and responsibilities as currently defined within the charter.
Yeah, and one of the big aspects of that is, would there be a financial aspect? Because, for example, in the one you just given, the 270 from Santa Monica, there is no financial aspect to the city clerk's roles and responsibilities. It is the current city clerk's opinion and position that it is beneficial for the city to have a check and balance in the city clerk's office.
I think so. I mean,
Santa Monica's had a financial director for years and has had a structure like that. And as it's a big enough city, also they have housing authorities, they have much more.
So it would be moving that to another position.
Yeah.
That role and response. The overall, because Section F is really about financial aspects. And if we took that away from the city clerk, where would we put it? would we create a new role in the charter or some other means?
Well, I would suggest or think that the idea would be to have those roles and responsibilities deleted from the charter, other than maybe certain specific exceptions like journal entries, or something to that effect. And then either have it removed from the charter and have it done by ordinance, rather than creating a new role within the charter for a finance director. And having those things assigned to the finance director's office by ordinance, rather than within the charter and creating a new role in the charter.
Okay, is there a,
Question.
yeah, Mr. Morocco?
So looking at F4, which talks about supervising maintenance of current inventories of all property, real and personal, is that something that a role of a finance director does? Is that something that's unique as part of your record keeping to keep track of all the inventory as well?
No, that's part of what the finance director should do. Yes. So that's fixed assets.
Okay.
Fixed assets, yeah.
Maybe reverse engineer this where, as I think it's a great point Mr. Rocco makes there, where we reverse engineer, review these roles and see how involved or not involved Ms. Bonzano currently is with those things, and whether there's an appetite for continuing to have that within the description of the city clerk's office.
For a future outside of,
Yeah, as
current city
important
clerk,
for not just you
Considering-
right now, but any city clerk who may hold your role.
Right.
Mr. Penzler?
And even though, there have been times when city managers have been, we haven't gotten along, sometimes you did get along. It's still the city council's responsibility to manage the manager. And the city council, and to hamstring the city council in terms of being able to alter the structure underneath the city manager by putting something in the charter to solidify it here, seems to be it would get in the way. I think what we need to do is to basically set what we think it should be. And when we get to that point, we'll look at it and say, these are the things that don't fit anymore.
And if they don't fit, do we simply remove them?
Remove them.
Or do we move them somewhere else?
Well, like I say, I don't think we should create in the charter a finance department, because the city manager 10 years, 20 years from now may look at it and be a totally different. Why go back through this process again? Let's just state what we want it to get to, the way we see the city clerk's position being, and then all those things that just don't fit, we recommend removal.
I'd ask Member Tabares, you're talking about maybe increasing the accounting. So for item 6, it sounds like a function that is currently being performed by the clerk's office, and that we would hope is an oversight role to continue, which would be to approve, accept as to correctness, together with the city manager before payment, all bills, invoices, payroll demands, and or charges against the city government. That seemed to be something you emphasize as being important for the clerk's role as an oversight role. Do you think that would be important to have somebody with accounting experience perform that function? Or do you think maybe 15 hours is enough? Or you think it might be all right to remove something like that?
I guess for me, it depends on the level of complexity of what that entails. I mean, if it's just a matter of comparing numbers and make sure that things add up, it seems more serial.
To Mr. Penzler's point, it sounds like you're almost arguing for this being done by ordinance
Right.
and deleting from the charter to allow for flexibility for future councils. But I would suggest that in addition to some of the things that are listed here within the Santa Monica ordinance, if we did it that way,
Be brought in.
that we would bring in item 6 as far as an oversight role for the city clerk's office.
That's fine. That's what I was saying before, was that if we figure out what we want it to be, let's find those things that don't fit anymore and ask them to be removed. If something does fit, let's leave it there.
Okay.
So if we need to remove 1 through 5 and leave 6, that's fine. Because this is way too difficult for a city manager and finance director to navigate in terms of who's responsible for what, who reports to what. That's the way I would look at it.
So potentially having F6
Fire was
remain.
turned up over under Mike, so let's hear what he has to say.
Did we say something else? He was anticipating.
No, I just, just as a suggestion, the big problem is not necessarily 1 through 6, it's F. I've had to look at that in the past, and there's no real answer as to why it happened. I found the actual, in the archives, the form where that phrase, city clerk shall, the part with under the direction of the city manager is handwritten in by the former city attorney, and there's no explanation of why. And that's the problem, because you have 2 people ambiguously in charge of it. And you have the anomaly of an elected city attorney, a city clerk, having charge of it under direction of an appointed city manager.
Elected official being told what
Yes.
to do.
And so I think that's the first thing you should look at, is who's going to be in charge. And then if you decide the city manager will, and then the city manager and the council can leave to future amendments to an ordinance as to, who the finance director, what their roles are and stuff. You can figure out what, if any, oversight role do you want the city clerk to continue doing, and then leave those in or add them in, and then have the educational demands as appropriate for those oversight roles. But I wouldn't focus yet on 1 through 6. I'd focus on F, where you have that, and that's where the ambiguity really lies.
So that's
Was this Gordon or before him?
it doesn't matter.
No, it was McFadden, was well before him. William McFadden.
Knowing now what you just said, that it was handwritten in, I'm going to ask a question. So the way it's written, have charge of the administration of the financial affairs of the city under the direction of the city manager, is under the direction of the city manager referring to the financial affairs of the city, or is it referring to charge of administration? Because you could read that either way, and especially if it was handwritten in, perhaps the intent was have charge of the administration of the financial affairs of the city that are under, the affairs that are under this direction of the city manager, which are all financial affairs under the direction of the city manager? No. So maybe it was just looking to those particular ones rather than stating that real ambiguity of, is it you in charge but under his direction, which just doesn't make sense. So when I first read that, I said, I could read this either way. It needs a better writing.
Right. Well,
So-
and you have to decide, and it's been used different.
Mike, the next question is, how many other writings in are there?
I was only looking at that one, and it's a little
Coming up
bit like
next.
looking for a needle in a haystack that you don't know there's a needle.
Yeah.
So I was gratified I found it and really frustrated. And eventually, so I was directed by the council on motion of John Parsons, referring to the previous city manager and the city clerk to investigate that particular clause. And I had not yet formed a formal opinion, and had meetings with the city clerk and city manager and suggested a possible way they could work that out, so I wouldn't necessarily reach a conclusion that one or both of them may hate. And they were able to work it out, and the council reported to the council, and they rescinded the request that I investigate that. But that's the part that, to me, the ambiguity lies. And then once you decide that, then you can go through 1 through 6 and see what remains, what's oversight.
Okay.
So I just offer that as a suggestion.
Mr. Morocco.
So first of all, Mr. McFadden just historically was the one who wrote the 1949 charter when he wasn't the city attorney. He was the sole person who wrote it. So I don't know if those notes came from all the community discussions that happened leading up to it or not.
Went on
But
to become a judge and now
That
the,
meeting, weren't you?
no, I've been reading all, but here's the, but I think for the discussion that we're having, we really do need to focus back on the city manager duties, which is 12.3, because, for example, 12.3B talks about preparing the budget annually. So to the extent that you think that it should be falling under the city manager, you may need to redefine those words as well. But there's some parallels between the two that can be addressed that way as well.
The issue with the conflict, the potential conflict.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, but you need to focus on what the role of the city managers as well when you're looking at this and trying to cut back the numbers.
and there will be an opportunity to do that under your final agenda item tonight in terms of future agenda topics. Not to discuss it, but to
Set up
give
the next
direct, exactly.
So I think we agree that F itself either needs cleanup or
Right.
elimination, one or the other.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Tavares.
Just one comment from the public's perspective. If we do decide to just delete, I think it just raises more questions in terms of, well, where does that go, right? So however that's framed, I just think it has to be done in a way that the public understands that it's not just going away.
The why
into-
where is it going to go, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So I don't know how to resolve that per se, but I just want to call that out. as-
If we do delete, we need to substantiate the actual deletion.
If I could, one of the things that's really important, because this has been tried before, and it's really important to have the buy-in of the clerk. Because if you're, just speaking politically, if you're opposed to it and you tell people, don't do this, it won't get done. So unless it's something that you can see as a reasonable thing as well, it may very well be a futile effort. So I think it's important for you, even though I know you're trying to stay out of the discussion, but it's just, you know more about it than anybody.
Right.
And we got to come to some kind of a middle ground between what city government is now as opposed to when this was written, and to what oversight you might provide for this process, not getting in the way of the whole financial structure. That's the way I look at it. So it's really important to have the city clerk in on it as opposed to opposed to it. That's from a political perspective as opposed to anything else, because when we tried it the last time, the city clerk was against it.
Right.
Mr. Solomon.
For me, I think as a working premise, what I would suggest in answer to your question, and I think based on Mr. Webb's comments and some of the comments of the other members, the idea here would be to delete F from the charter itself, have it substituted as an ordinance to be created for the public, that these guardrails are not going away, and then discuss those items in F that we would like to keep as part of an ordinance, along with other duties that we would want to keep for the city clerk's office, whether it be educational requirements, the elections, the oversight for public records requests, and so on and so on. I think as a working premise, deleting F and then sort of not creating Frankenstein's monster, but an ordinance fashioned in F to replace to clean up those roles and responsibilities, the city manager portion, the accounting portion, whether it's required or not needed or not, the oversight role, which it sounds like we're all in support of, or I would think we're all in support of that oversight role. And it sounds like our current clerk would be in support of the oversight role. So I think that is a working premise to say, if we all agree on the idea of perhaps deleting F, having it replaced by ordinance, and then fashioning those specificities into the ordinance that we would want to have clearly defined roles between city clerk and city manager, and those roles that the city clerk would perform. My question for Mr. Webb, and maybe why I took him away from his work again, would be, could we do that?
I'd have to look specifically whether, I believe you could, in that the council could give additional duties to the clerk. The problem is that when it goes before the voters, whoever the city attorney is the oversight role could disappear with 3 votes of the council. So
By ordinance.
right. And so-
Proposing to have an ordinance does not guarantee an ordinance.
Right, or it could be removed if they don't like, if they're closer to the city manager and the, finance director than the city clerk. I would think you could leave F, but rewrite it the way you want. And what you would put in the ordinance is all the specifics that you want the finance director to do, because that could be amended as it evolves. But the oversight role would be part of the duties of the charter duties, and a city council couldn't change it without a vote of the people. So anything that you think should go to finance should be by way of ordinance. Anything that you think should be for the city clerk, however you want to define that oversight, should probably remain in the charter.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we're definitely talking about F itself and whichever 1 through 6, potentially all of them, maybe moving part of them to other areas. And then, Member DeBarros, I think you had pointed out that the last paragraph, the last paragraph, would talk about the eligibility, that we should actually increase those minimums potentially. Is that fair, or?
That's fair, yes, potentially, depending on where we land on the actual oversight role.
Okay, and then just to cover the entire section here, for A through E, does anyone have any points to make on any of those? Would we potentially revisit any of those to maybe include some of the examples from the City of Santa Monica one or others? Or leave those as is?
I would suggest something.
Those seem straightforward.
I mean, I would like to add elections in there. So that's.
But leave A through E as they are now and potentially add a couple of other things.
At least elections.
Let's see.
Okay. So that's where we need to, the next step would be to get into some real specificity of which ones, how, and substantiating that. And if we do take them out, do we try to put some kind of brackets on them with what we would want the ordinance to be? We did that with the financial things, for example, only 25% over 5 years. Would there be something like that in this, or just leave it? Purely because, as Mr. Webb has pointed out, there may not be an ordinance, or the ordinance may not be something that we were, as a committee, were thinking would replace it.
Yeah, I don't know when it comes to, I think it's a well-formatted suggestion, keeping those things in there to avoid the problem of having a finger quoting a rogue city council engaging in battles there. I don't know when it comes to the ordinance and the finance director and the clerk's duties, would we then leave how the city manager and clerk interact in the charter? Because the city council can dismiss the city manager also.
Well, I'm not certain what you mean by how they interact, but I think this was a clumsy compromise is what my sense of what they were trying to do. And you just give whatever oversight, if that's the direction the committee's going, you just put that in. And then maybe you amend to put the city manager clearly in charge and then leave it up to the council by ordinance.
There's a clear oversight role in the charter for the clerk.
Right.
And a clear direction that the city manager is responsible for all those other things.
Right, and the finance director, as all non-elected department heads, serves at the pleasure of the city manager. And then if the council wants to get involved, they can give specificity for what the finance directors do. But it probably makes sense just to leave it all to the city manager.
Okay, I would then ask the clerk, don't want to put you on the spot right now, it's something to think about. We'll be back discussing this, I would think, again, for those other things you mentioned, election, that you think would be valuable and specific to the clerk's office, that as an oversight role that we would want to retain in the charter, or other things, as the chair mentioned, for those items A through E that perhaps would be added there or could be added there. I think we've done some pretty good
And how
drilling down on that.
specifically to even word those. For
Right.
example, the example 4 from the city of Santa Monica, ensure compliance with the Political Reform Act. How do you interpret that? I mean, to what extent is it?
I got
should that
Mr.
be-
Webback out here when I said it.
Keep that all night.
So I think that's really some great things. It's almost like a hybrid what we're going to do, it sounds like, but we're going to solve the problem. It sounds like, or we can refer what looks like a good solution to the council for consideration and have buy-in from the most important person when it comes to the public there, the city clerk, who is the public's representative for all these things.
Okay, sounds good to me.
Could we then, similar to what we did in the past, have two people work together on putting together some specificity to bring back to the committee for review? Because if we just leave it, may or may not happen. Member
I'll take
Solomon?
on that.
Yeah,
I'll take on that with whoever else wants to join.
I was going to suggest Member Solomon and
Yeah,
Mr.
I'll
Pinsler.
work on that unless Member Tabaris wants to do that.
Well, I'll leave it up to you since you have more of the finance lens. So I
Would
and
you-
because I don't know if Ms. Wonderly would be willing to do it. So
All right, okay, thanks.
That gives us a good start.
Yeah, good stuff.
Because that's
I'm happy to weigh in and help.
All right, thank you very much.
section F and all of its items are really the crux, and any potentially ones we would want to add from other examples. We can still come back, depending on how that goes, we can still come back to the eligibility requirements because maybe they're no longer really applicable.
Relevant.
Gives us an opportunity to come up with language that if there's consensus among the committee members, then could go to Mr. Webb's office for any necessary recommendations if we've misstepped somewhere.
And work
I
together
was
with
just
the
gonna
city
comment.
clerk as well.
On Member Tavares' comment that I'm happy to weigh in. You have to be careful because if you weigh in with Committee Member Pinsler and someone weighs in with Committee Member Solomon, we have a Brown Act violation. So it'd be best to weigh in only in here in the meetings.
Mr. Morocco.
I know this is beyond the purview of what we're doing, but it may be helpful if the people who are drafting come up with some suggestions of what they would put it in as duties in the ordinance that they would be suggesting, just so that we can see the contrast between what we want to do with the charter and what we think maybe should be done with an ordinance.
To provide a sample
Yeah,
ordinance?
No, to provide the contrast,
I
basically.
don't see any problem with that. It's the process. Let's say that Gina and I come up with something and we pass it out to everyone. That's fair?
In the meeting.
As part of the next
In the
agenda.
meeting, and never before the agenda. That's where we've had.
Agenda comes out.
As long as the first time they see it is
At
in the
agenda
agenda
time.
when the public
Yes.
does.
No pre-discussion. I just
Right,
want to.
and no pre-distribution.
Yes,
Okay.
But you can discuss it, city attorney, city clerk.
right. Yeah, that's okay. Fine with me. I
And
want to make
we-
that clear. to
And city
everybody.
manager, I think you'd want to bring the city manager into it too. Because you're putting some of the duties onto
Yeah,
the city
city
manager.
Actually, yeah.
should be part of the discussion. Not a voting member, so that's okay.
Yep.
All right,
Can you
thank you all.
have that by the next meeting?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I believe so, yeah.
You're going to be busy.
That's what I do, I'm busy.
Okay. Thank you all.
So, let me get back to the agenda here.
Should we make a motion to continue that item?
Yeah, I just wanted to
Mr. Chair?
check on the agenda, see if there's anything else in there that we wanted to take a look at. It's just
Discussion of
the
possible
discussion. I want to make sure.
Okay, and we have
Okay, so
we have
we-
no Zoom, and we have no e-comments. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier.
None and none?
None and none.
Thank you. Okay, so we have selected to have two committee members work on a proposal to bring back to the committee as part of the next agenda, not before. And then with that, we would have a motion to continue this item to the next meeting.
Motion.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Moving on to item J1. Discussion and possible action as it pertains to moral turpitude, clarifying residency requirements and analysis pertaining to extending the required residency period for an elective office from 30 days to 1 year as directed by the city council. That's a mouthful right there. Who would like to kick this one off?
I will kick this one off. You may
Not
not,
out, but off.
you may not be aware, but there was a special meeting earlier this month.
We're aware.
That was said with full sarcasm. So there was a special meeting regarding possible removal of a council member for not failing to meet the residency requirements under the charter. And at the end of the subsequent regular meeting that night, this was the referral that was made from staff. There is not a definition of residency contained in the city charter. There are different definitions of residency unrelated in the Muni Code, but there is no definition. And I've given you some of the general principles around it. There's not a clear definition. There's conflicting definitions in state law and in different sections. The charter was written prior to some of those, state current laws. I made a suggestion because we talked about the last time the removal of an elected official came before the council back in 1998.
I remember it well.
Yes, and there were a lot of questions about the definition of moral turpitude. And someone who's convicted of a crime of moral turpitude shall be removed from their position, and the council shall declare the position vacant. There's no definition of moral turpitude. Unlike residence, there's a lot more, it's less vague. There's much more case law on it. It's primarily in two areas, the area of criminal law, because witnesses can be impeached if they have prior convictions of moral turpitude. So there's a great deal of case law around that. Similarly, in the immigration area, that can be a reason for deporting someone from the country, and there's a lot of federal case law on that. So there's some questions as, that doesn't cover every crime. So there is some vagueness. And because we discussed that, they included, any recommendation, wanted you to look at a city definition of residency, a city definition of moral turpitude to the extent you can do it. There are charter cities that define residency in their charter, and then it becomes, now they can be vague, but at least you know what standard you're interpreting. And then finally, Councilmember Obaji made a friendly amendment and wanting to see if, wanted you to look at extending the residency period from 30 days to 1 year. I haven't had an opportunity to look at that. I do know that there's some case law that would prevent you from extending it too long. And there was a case in California, went to U.S. Supreme Court, where it violated the Privileges and Immunities Clause to have a waiting period before once you're a resident, you're a resident. Mm-hmm. And so, I wanted to see, to the extent you wanted to extend it, what your tentative idea was, and then I could look to see if you said 2 years, I know that would be unconstitutional. I wanted to see, are you looking at what additional period, and then I can hone in on the research regarding that additional period.
Mr. Webb, can I ask a question on that too? One of the court cases you put in here and has the terminology, the High Court, citing Carter, has termed the right to hold public office as a fundamental right. So that I would see could potentially play into any time delay factor as well. If it's a fundamental right, yeah, you can't say you can't have it for 2 years would make sense to me.
You know, so one of the cases, not dealing with that, but there was a period of time where the voters of California felt that people were coming to California because welfare benefits were more generous than they were in other states. And they passed a law that would, for the first year, I think, the person could only get the welfare benefits that they were entitled to in the state that they came from. And the U.S. Supreme Court had no trouble in ruling that was a violation of the right to travel under the Privileges and Immunities Clause, and struck that down. So the right to hold public office is a fundamental right. And the other case that I cited, you want to be very clear in whatever definition you come up with, because the vagueness is going to go to has to point towards not removing the elected official.
Well,
Yes, Mr. Penzler.
a couple of things. One of the things that has always been clear is that technology has surpassed the law. So after the Bush-Gore election in 2000, this Help America Vote Act was created. Part of that was to create this system with the Postal Service that when you change your address, that gets automatically reported back. And that was actually part of the problem that the special meeting was all about, is that this process happened faster than most people expected. So one of the issues here is that you need to, at least to me, is that in order to be eligible to run for election or be in office, you have to be a righteous elector in that.
Well, it depends. So the charter as it reads right now, to qualify, you have to be. There's not a requirement that you maintain being an elector under the charter. The statewide definition for council members, which was added to state law after the charter, the 1949 charter, requires that you be an elector. When you look at the section, then that basically would lead to having the domicile. However, other sections of state law, 1770, don't require it. And the section for mayor does not require that you be an elector under state law. And so those are all things that you're going to want to look at defining as clearly and precisely as you can what is demanded of the elected officials, and for which they can be removed.
Speaking for myself, it seems to me that if you are eligible to vote, you should be able to be in office. Once you are no longer eligible to vote, you have to leave. The issue that happened here was that it just kind of passed in the night, where a change of address was put in, which triggered this other event, which raised a question. To me, though, the rule should be that if you are eligible to vote in that, and that includes the amount of time you have to live in a place. If you are eligible to vote in the state of California or in the county of Los Angeles, however it is set up, for X period of time prior to running for office, that's got to be the rule for everybody, at least to me.
Well, and it can be if you...
But you can change it if you're a charter city.
Right, but the question is, does that maintain? And then I don't want to get into any detail about that night, other than, there was a question of whether the person ever lost the right to vote because he alleged that he voted in November. The clerk requested, the special election was called on a Thursday before 4 days the city hall was closed, requested from the county registrar, okay, what is the registration status in case the council wanted to get in on that? I wanted them to have all available. Didn't ever hear from them before the special meeting. So, at what point do they lose the right to vote? But you can certainly come up, I certainly would advise you to come up with a definition of residency. You can include maintaining status of, or maintaining the status as a elector in the city or in the district to which they're elected. That would be a massive improvement over the silence that we have now. I don't know what to tell you about moral turpitude because it's fairly well defined under state law and case law. Having said that, you had the city attorney who was convinced it was a crime of moral turpitude, and ultimately on that point, he was right. You had two other outside counsels that the council wanted to get direction from, and they had slightly different opinions, including the former city attorney of LA.
Right.
But then the AG had summarily, it's like, oh, it's definitely a crime of moral turpitude. And they're probably right because forgery under the case law, it's clear because it's either dishonesty or a willingness to do evil. And so there's pretty good case law. So I don't know, I think it'd be difficult to come up with a definition of moral turpitude that would be better than the large body of case law that's out there. But residency, definitely, some definition would be better than the silence we have now.
My experience that night is, because I asked about it, I'm not a lawyer, so I asked, what is it? And basically what they said is what the justice said about pornography, I'll know it when I see it.
Understand, yeah.
And it was really confusing because at some point people said, well, he committed a felony. Well, he pled no low contender, but it was turned into a misdemeanor.
Right.
So is that, again, your definition or not? No one could come up with it.
It's interesting because none of the attorneys had a background as prosecutor, and we typically don't necessarily have a problem with that and I imagine an immigration lawyer would feel the same way because there's so much case law about it. And so, I can tell you that hit and run with injury, theft definitely is, forgery is, battery is not, DUI is not. And so you have a whole list of case law of what particular crime. And here, the charter doesn't demand that it be a felony. I saw the notes and there was a lot of discussion. It's like a crime, but it's got to be a crime of moral turpitude. But I think that would be somewhat of a challenge to do better than the case law that exists. But residency absolutely needs to be defined in the charter. And that would be, and obviously I can help with that once. And we can look at other, for the next meeting when you hear that, I'll look at every charter city that I can find that has a definition and provide that. Long Beach, I think, refers to place of abode. As the issue paper I gave you said, it's a little bit difficult because we don't know exactly whether non-traditional means of abode will be, if you're unhoused. You can be a resident in Hermosa one day and Redondo the next with the required intent. So.
Part of the reason HAVA did what it did was to reduce the number of particularly absentee ballots that went to non-active addresses. That was what they were trying to solve by creating this thing with the Postal Service. In this particular case, the Postal Service change of address may have been a function of where the bulk of the family was, but not necessarily him. So it's really confusing.
Well, yeah, I don't want to get into that much that night. But what that night highlighted, and the council gave this direction, was we need a definition of residency that is clear enough that we can apply. It's not part of your direction, but you may want to look at, well, never mind. It's not part of your direction.
I
So
think it
I'll
would
just
be
leave it at
potentially
that.
safer to
It's where your electric toothbrush is.
refer to an outside entity.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So in a general law city, the only way to do it is, the only way to challenge a person in a non-charter city is for leave to file a quo warranto action. So the city attorney was correct on the issue of it being moral turpitude. However, the council was correct in that they weren't going to give leave to file because there was only 2 months. It got extended to 4 months by a runoff. And that's the only way to challenge it. There could be, instead of the council shall declare a vacancy, the council shall file an application for leave to file a quo warranto action to remove them, because that minimizes, it puts a council in a very difficult position, and it may be easier to turn it to the AG, and the AG is bound to decide what's in the public's interest. And that's why they say, look, we don't even know if the lawsuit will be settled in the 2 months, and it's not in the public interest to spend all that money to do so. But that's,
Okay.
that is what
Did you
it
have
is.
something?
Yes, please.
He was
So
up first, I'm sorry.
No problem with that.
indulge me for a few minutes with a rudimentary common law class.
Okay.
If you can, please. The fundamental right as described within the materials that you sent to us, is derived from the Privileges and Immunities Clause?
Yeah, I'd have to look at that. Well, no, I should take it back. The right that was derived of so not the fundamental right that from the case, that was going back to the welfare case. I was extending it for that.
About the person otherwise being indigent?
Yes.
Okay.
And that you couldn't place time limit in qualifications for certain rights, such as the right to subsistence. You're either a bona fide resident or you're not. And you could put demands or requirements that this doesn't apply to a non-bona fide resident.
Okay, that feathers in very well to the question that I have then. So as something that's derived from a constitutional right, if you're going to seek to limit that right in any way, limit may be the wrong word for it, you have to have some kind of, this would be a rational basis to go ahead and limit that, such as 30-day residency within the city or 6-month residency with the city. Is that fair to say, or is that inaccurate?
Well, it's tied, a fundamental right is tied to a stricter.
Stricter scrutiny.
Right. Well, I'll double check that, but a higher level of review.
Maybe an intermediate scrutiny.
Right. I don't want to be.
I understand. I'm just trying to where I'm going with this is that when what we're asking for, or what we're hoping to discuss is the idea of what kind of definition do we put into it? And you made mention of it in your original presentation. If it's 2 years, that's probably not going to pass muster.
Right. And I recall that. So I apologize. I'm not caught up from my sleep. I don't know if you're caught up from your sleep.
4:15,
Yeah. It was a 12-hour council meeting. So,
Was on a plane.
so at my age, I can't pull all-nighters, and I haven't had a chance to look at that issue. But what I'm basing that on is in my research on the residency issue, I came across an AG opinion, but I'm not certain which one. that dealt with a 2-year residency. And so that's why I'm saying. And so what I'm going to do before next time is come up with the charter review language, charters language from other charters that have a definition of residency, and then do research on specifically where the limits, where the courts have found a residency requirement okay or too lengthy.
And would that also then apply to other terms of art, say domicile or abode and so on, if we were going to introduce language like that?
No, I don't think so, because the cases have said, look, you can have clear definition of a residency, a resident or non-residence. It's the waiting period before. So if you move to a new city, a new state, you're a resident or you're not a resident. You can't say you're a resident, but you don't get, and there's a lot of case law on this, you don't get all the qualifications of being a resident until you've been here longer. And that's where this may fall into. The domicile, the resident, however, abode, are they a resident or not? And so that's not going to be a problem if it's specific enough, if it's not ambiguous. It's the period of time that I'm worried.
Which may not meet the scrutiny. It may be discriminatory.
Right.
In its sense.
And for that, we're talking the example, the 30 days of eligibility.
That's what I'm talking about with that.
Okay.
Just period.
Yeah, and problematic to that could be if someone lived here for 30 years, moved away for 6 months, and then came back, would they then have to wait that, if it's a 1-year period, they would, because it's, the way it's termed is it's the immediately preceding the date of filing.
Yeah, so I think just highlighting it, because that's the most I can do right now, that issue is going to be the most problematic. The residency, you just have to be as clear and precise as possible. The moral turpitude, I think it should be looked at by you. I'll give you a list of, okay, well then you can say, you know, we don't want to look at it. I'll give you a list of crimes that have determined these are moral turpitude, these are not moral turpitude. And you may look at that list and say, we can't define it better. And that may not, but it was in the minutes that I think the mayor had said, hey, we need to look at this. But I think residency specific, you have to be as specific as possible. I need to do more research because it was just a late addition.
Understood.
To on the waiting period.
Morocco.
Two more quick questions, please. It's voter status, registered or not a registered voter. If assuming residency, is that something to also be considered or not?
You made a comment earlier that would go a long way if we said maintain.
Well, I'm not saying it would go a long way. And so you can make that a requirement.
We could
of residency.
And that would not be discriminatory.
Well, yeah, because the California, it's not going to be discriminatory if you're just setting up the test for what a resident is. And the California code that I mentioned before that applies to council people in general law cities, after the charter was amended, but not too long after, they set it up, and it requires that you maintain your position as an elector in the city. But the California rule for mayors, you don't have to. And so, and because we don't say, it just says resident, we don't say domicile or anything else, it's problematic. And that's why be as specific as possible. I don't foresee a lot of if you're clear, I don't foresee a lot of prohibitions about what you can and can't put in there. It's more be as specific as possible.
I'll ask one more kind of loaded question. I apologize because I know you're tired. But where there's an incongruency between, say, state law and our charter. So the government code for the state versus our charter language, where there's an incongruency, we're looking to court cases or precedent based on other charter cities and not general law cities.
No, that's, if I'm saying that, I don't believe I'm saying that.
I'm not saying you said that, I'm
Okay.
asking.
It's a
So-
municipal affair.
So, yes, that's exactly. So in the California Constitution, it specifically gives to California, to charter cities, the ability to regulate its municipal affairs, and how we elect the qualifications of our elected officials is specifically ours to control. It's because our charter is silent, that's the only reason you look to state law.
Which is the point that I was trying to get to is where they are silent, then if we're not specific enough, then it could be that incongruency or silence could be interpreted by state law rather than our charter.
Well, it's not, you look to it because where else are you going to look? But it'd still be a problem, for defining
Argument for
something
being
that
as
isn't.
specific as possible.
Yes, and
Exception being if it's declared a matter of statewide concern.
correct. California had Redondo had a challenge to its term limits for, I think, both the council and I know for the school board. And the school board, the education code does not have a requirement that there be term limits for the school board. And it was challenged, and the appellate court upheld the term limits in the charter as applied to the school board because it was a municipal affair.
This one we tried to extend term limits in 2014 or when we first
No,
implemented
putting
them?
them in, when they put them in, because the extended didn't pass. There is
Story behind everything.
There is a
Handwritten
recent
sometimes.
case, a lawsuit, where a council extended their terms under threat of SB 415. They did that, as most charter cities did, as opposed to,
Cutting them short.
well, everyone extended them. But they did that as opposed to us challenging SB 415 and getting a court ruling that it didn't apply to charter cities. But this city didn't go to the voters. And that was always a concern of Redondo, or a concern of mine. Like, let's say we got a different court ruling. Well, what happens if the voters say no? Because we can't, council can't change the charter. And so that's fortunately an unknown question, but it's going to be decided in a future city. And they're now having staggered elections because the extended terms without voter approval couldn't be authorized.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Morocco and then Mr. Craig.
Okay, so I'm actually going to take a different tack because you keep on trying to bring in moral turpitude back into the discussion. So I think we really do need to clearly bifurcate the residency and the moral turpitude issues.
And the eligibility question, the number of days.
That's fine too.
Those are all, I'm just telling you what
Those
I
are the
see
three
initially as what the
Right.
problems will be.
Well, I was at that meeting. It was all on residency, and you kept on sneaking in. Well, we have this moral turpitude issue. I understand the issue. Mr. Pinsler, again, when I'm reading through it, was involved in that whole thing. So I do think we need to separate the two.
Okay.
And I think, as you say, moral turpitude is a little bit easier to do, but I am going to.
No, it's
It is easier to do because there's case law on it.
So what
and when you're
he's saying-
dealing with
It's easier to
constitutional.
not do.
yes, it's easier to interpret if you have a case. Yes, absolutely.
And since you're dealing with constitutional rights, you are most likely, if somebody is not acquiescing with you, you're going to end up with a lawsuit either for an injunction to do it or some liability for the city, which I think that's one of the reasons you want us to throw it in the charter, because it minimizes the council being sued for something that they may decide to do it. I said at the meeting, I think it's a two-step process. I think you have to make the finding that the person's not a resident. That is completely within the purview of the council. I think they had that right. But once they make that finding, then the next step is, okay, what do you do with it? That's where you make it vacant, because that kicks in all sorts of other provisions in it. So what I'm going to suggest that we do is punt this back to the city council, because they can come up with guidelines and definitions by ordinance that goes through all the stuff on residency. I think if you're trying to simplify the charter, as we have been talking about throughout this charter review, if you start throwing in words that are going to make it even more jumbled, I think the intent is you need to be a resident. I think the council, in a situation where they don't have to kick somebody off the council, will be able to effectively sit down and say, what does it mean to be a resident? And they can go through, voter registrations. Well, this is the exception that comes up with it, and come up with an ordinance that deals with it. And if need be, you can have all candidates that run for office at some point take an oath or affirmation that says they've read it, they understand it, this is what's expected of them. With regards to...
Can I comment on that, if that's okay?
Can I just finish one point?
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so what I saw also was the interesting thing is in some of the cities where residency becomes an issue, they have the person whose residency is in question sign another oath. And whenever you challenge somebody's residency and they've taken an oath, we're potentially a criminal act of fraud. I mean, I heard rumors that somebody was going to say, well, if he moved out in October, he's been taking money from the city for so many months, that's fraudulent, that's criminal action. And that's something you really don't want your council to all of a sudden make accusations that are criminal. So I think that this is something, since we don't have the pressure anymore coming up, and I think that our city clerk does the eligibility stuff up front, that they can actually take an objective view without an election hanging over there, without people moving out. I mean, what I really don't want to see is, you've had 2 meetings in Montana and somebody coming back and say, well, he's really in Montana, that's where he owns property. I think the council can take an objective point of view and come back and say, this is how we're defining residents. It should be something that should be unanimous from the council. With the same thing with moral turpitude, they can take that list that you have a mile long and say, this is moral turpitude, which is actually interesting because we have a councilman who's got a hearing next week, and the headers of the thing says moral turpitude, but even if it's a violation, it's not a crime.
Right.
So you've got those kind of things to deal with. And I think we're going to be meeting for a while. Let's give the council a chance to come up with something that will define the residency and set up standards, and it can be a lot longer than what we can do. We can say, okay, you have to provide utility bills that show you're here. You have to have a statement of intention to say that you're still living in the community. I don't know how to deal with. In the old days, it used to be you own property that made you an elector, even if you had multiple properties. When we did the charter, that's how they came up with who's going to be on the charter committee. So again, my suggestion is to push it back to the council initially, let them see if they can come up with something, or if they need a task force for, the people in the community to have a way to weigh in on it without having to throw in tons of language into this charter. I think it would be a much better approach.
Okay, so again, with everything, I don't know that I'm thinking clearly, but my initial thought is you're the task force.
That's exactly right.
And
I'm not going to kick anything back.
And the problem with it being in an ordinance is the council can change it, change their own qualifications. if it's an ordinance. I don't think it will be a massive addition to the charter. The ones I've seen are like a paragraph long, a lengthy paragraph, but a paragraph. The thing that, when you're talking about, that's more proof of residency. And we can refer to it if we refer to the government code section that, indicates what you look for. Do they own property? Are they registered? Do they have utility bills? A lot of, there are some AG opinions that have said that. There are some cases that have said that, and you can refer to them or incorporate them. So, for example, for the manner of running operations, some 40 years after the residency was put in, we adopted the election code, but we didn't adopt it for residency. We adopted it for how you run elections. In the residency, you could potentially refer to another code, but the problem with that is then you're giving up, your right to do that. That would all be facts so there was, in my term as city attorney, and prior to Ms. Manzano taking the office, there was a candidate for an elected office who put a location where you couldn't legally live in the city. And so and because it was a requirement at the front, I said, okay, well, you can ask for all those indicia of residence. Do you own the property? Do you blah, 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 blah? And ultimately, it got sorted out and the person qualified as the candidate. So I don't know that has to be in the charter. I will research whether or not other cities have a charter requirement that they then define the term in an ordinance, but I think that may be problematic.
Okay, but the thing that if you're doing the research on, if you can look under the concept of objective intent and whether that's controlling in the situations that deal with trying to get somebody removed from office, I think
It clearly does under case law and under all the AG opinions. It clearly does. It's got to be a union of act and intent. And there's a difference between setting up residency as opposed to leaving residency, and the standards are different. The standards are very different. But we don't even know what we're looking at before we evaluate this, because there isn't a definition of resident for any of the elected offices. And so it will be important to have clarity in there. And you don't have to, the opinion could be, a theoretical opinion is, we think the council, should determine collectively the issue of residency and not come up with a specific charter amendment you're proposing, but give, like, we think you should take these factors into consideration, and that would do the work they're looking at, but leave the final decision, the final deliberation. It's always up to them to put before the voters, but it can give them more of a role in crafting. But I am, without doing research, I am a little concerned about having eligibility left up to them and not the voters.
How does the residency interface with the section 10.2 where somebody may leave the city, if they leave the city for more than 30 days? City council
That doesn't apply to city council members. So so you're referring to treasurer, clerk, and city attorney. Yeah. So we all have different standards. If you look at the city council, they can't miss, and I'm just going off memory, I think they can't miss four meetings
right,
unless they're excused. And then residency and moral turpitude are the same. Clerk, treasurer, and city attorney, It's you can't leave the state. So I haven't taken a vacation for more than a month outside.
But is the inference there that if you're gone for more than 30 days, you're no longer a resident of the city?
No, it's a different requirement.
Not going to the
Basically,
meetings.
the reason the council, well, no, it's not even that. The reason the council is 4 meetings is council determines policy and passes the budget. That is their essential role. Well, if you're missing meetings, you're not setting policy. 4 meetings without being excused. The reason clerk, city attorney, and city treasurer are different is, and keep in mind, this was before the advent of DocuSign and everything else, nothing's getting signed. No contracts are being approved. Nothing is being done. The actual work that you were elected to do isn't happening. And so that's a different standard. And the mayor doesn't have either of those. So, and again, because the mayor is presiding officer, he runs the meetings, and he has the power of veto, and,
But he has to
he
sign
points the.
contracts.
If I could,
points
this
the-
is another artifact.
Right.
Because when the 4 meetings was done, there were only 2 meetings a month. That meant it was 2 months. Now there are 3 meetings a month. So it's possible for someone to be just a little bit over a month and not be there.
Just another
And it's
area of
completely
inconsistency to
different.
maybe address.
And it may be in your last item, something that you want to ask the council to direct you to look at. You may be wanting to harmonize all those things, but they're very different.
Should be some consistency.
Wayne hasn't spoken yet.
Well, but they're appreciating the differences in the role. I don't think they should be identical because the jobs are very different. The clerk, city attorney are full-time. The treasurer until recently was full-time. And it should be a different, standard of what their requirement. The council is really about the council meetings where a sole council person doesn't have authority. It's only as part of the council as a whole, or at least the majority, where their power rests, and it's a lot of power. So they shouldn't all be the same. You don't have the mayor having to get excused by the council, because what happens when the mayor is vetoing a lot of 3-2 decisions? Maybe the 3 people don't
Don't excuse them.
don't excuse them.
Or do excuse them.
Because they want to remove them. So that's the one area where there doesn't need to be uniformity, but perhaps it could be modernized in terms of the actual duties of the offices in the current day.
Okay. Mr. Craig.
Well, first of all, apologize for coming a little late and then I was in my garage working, but I did not get an agenda, nor was I informed there was no one here. So I rushed over here to be here. So, but I think getting the City Attorney Webb's point, we're the task force that's supposed to be coming up with these recommendations, and it makes sense for us, and the council delegated us to come up with items that we can give them a list. We're an advisory committee. They could look at them, they could disregard them, they can come up with their own. I think it makes more sense for us to take that responsibility on. But one thing that I'm in my business, I deal with residency a lot. People buy homes, so I usually consider those a residence. Now, to reside in this, to have residency requires a residence. Now, I think it's very easy to then go to the next step is what constitutes a legal residence. And that's something we haven't talked about, because right now, according to our charter, I could say Eugene's garage is my residence, and that's it. I'm now in office. There's no other than being here for 30 days.
Sleeping next to the Peloton.
Exactly. Now, in a garage, you can convert a garage to an accessory dwelling unit, as they're called now, an ADU. There's a huge checklist of things you have to go through. For example, you can't have a water heater in the garage. It's not legal to live in it. Now, it would be very easy to check and see if on a property, for example, Eugene's garage, I'm claiming as a residency, someone can go to the city, look up the building department permits that were taken out to see if it is in fact legal. If it's not, then what happens? Does code enforcement come out and say, that's not your residence, you're no longer in office, or what? That's an issue we have right now. So I think we could very easily define what a residence is, at least by having a legal property, as City Attorney Webb mentioned. There was I think you said someone was running for office and they give a PO box or something as their address or something.
I won't say, but but I said it was appropriate for the clerk to investigate and ask for the other information. Whereas, in every person who runs, they just take down whatever you say as whatever you certify as your residence. But do look at the last page of the memo that's in your agenda packet, because there's a question of whether traditional housing can be a requirement of, and I don't know what the answer is because courts have held.
Homeless people can vote.
Right, exactly. But there was a case in a city where they gave permission to sue, where someone was claiming a non-traditional place to live. Now, I have been unable to find whether that lawsuit was successful.
Right.
And so I'll need to do more research on that. But it remains a question, are you limited? If you put a traditional requirement in there, that could be infringing on people who are unhoused. And so that may be an area where it's tricky to do. But the more specific we can be, the much better off future councils will be, elected officials. The future city attorney will be much better off in terms of being able to know what the requirement is. But I look at that and look at the two different AG opinions. I put one that said it was okay to have traditional, but the second suggested that only applied to indigent people. At least suggested that. And so that's something to look at before next meeting. I'm sorry to interrupt.
The other issue would be too, whether it's a commercial property, because I can't kind of claim my business address as being my residence.
Well, and that was the second case that I put in. But I don't know, there are different consequences to potential consequences. But right now, under like Martin versus Boise, pretty much any place that, or outside the pallet shelter no, that's different. Somewhere else, 500 yards or more from the pallet shelter, if you don't have a place to live, that could be your residence. And there can't be any enforcement action taken. So I just want to highlight that that's addressed the issue, but there's no clear-cut guidance on it.
Excuse me, Mike, but if you create a thing where it's a righteous elector, someone who is, an elector is a registered person who can vote, if I understand the structure of it. So if you make that the rule, is it discriminatory against those people who are not registered to vote because but they are quote unquote residents?
I'm assuming without researching it, that the answer would be no, because as I mentioned, the government code that applies to city councils and general law cities has a requirement of both. And it remains that, so if the previous charter had said, okay, for residency, we adopt the government code section such and such, and all as it's currently iterated, then we look at it and then figure out, and then the council can apply the facts to the law. We don't have that. And as I mentioned, they don't have that requirement for the mayor, and we don't have that requirement.
The charter, there are a lot of charters that use the term electors. So that would be helpful in this, because what we're then doing is passing on to the county as to whether or not someone is a registered voter, a registered elector. So if someone becomes a non-voter in that location, then they are no longer an elector.
Correct. And we do require it to be eligible to run. And you have to do it by 30 days, but not to maintain it. There isn't that requirement. And so you could do something more simple in terms, okay, all the stuff to qualify, you have to maintain while you're in office. That would be, a more precise definition. It just depends on how much detail you want to get into, how much you want to abdicate it to a government code section that could massively change.
Is there a requirement of maintaining residency after you're elected?
Yes,
Yes.
as not defined.
Which is what the subject of everything was.
Right, and-
But not,
and-
but
but not
not
defined.
But not defined.
Right.
And then also not necessarily to be a registered voter.
Right. There is a requirement to be a resident and for council to be a resident in your district. There is not a requirement currently to be a registered voter,
Other than to run.
other than to run, and you have to be 30 days prior to election. Election. Yeah.
Now, the
29
state
days.
permits,
Some weird number.
some states, now we don't, but some states allow same-day registration. We have 14 days prior
think you could do
to
same day.
become, right?
Do same day.
So
I think.
to require anything more than 14 days to become a registered, an elector, if we decide to go to the elector route, then the requirement would be 14 days.
What's the difference between registered voter and elector?
The thing about, no, they are the same thing.
Okay.
But the term elector,
They're different. Wait, no, I'm sorry. Elector, yes, I thought it was resident and elector. I apologize. It was
Registered voter.
and elector.
Currently,
yeah.
it says registered voter.
yeah.
There's not an issue with
But
that.
if you then say, although the city can say, you can be more than 14 days. But if you're going to use the term elector, the electors are 14 days.
Right, but you can specify that
You
you want a
can specify
longer
more.
period. You don't have, we're not limited to the 14 days.
We're not limited to it, but the question would be, if you're just going to say, we want you to be a registered voter to be able to run for office, 14 days is.
It's a low bar.
Yeah, right.
I don't think there's any move to lower it.
Yeah, I mean, we
It's
we're
up
not
to you,
limited.
but, and also, there's a requirement that you be a registered voter for 30 days to council and a resident for 30 days. It's different for the three other offices where you have to be a registered voter at the time of filing.
Right.
And a resident for 30 days. There's not a requirement that you be a voter for 30 days. And so there are all these inconsistencies.
Oh, the thing about mayor, I would be surprised, wouldn't be surprised if that goes back years and years and years ago, when mayors were more administrators before they were city managers. And that maybe you didn't have to be a citizen or registered voter or a resident even, because you were an administrator as opposed to being an elected official. I don't know.
I don't know. Sometimes our charter, because our mayor has more powers, it doesn't have the city manager powers, but their definition of eligibility is exactly the same as the three elected departments. So they're different so you don't have to be a registered voter 30 days prior, just at the time of filing and be a resident. And so they're clearly, from that, the way they phrase that, there's a difference between being a registered voter in the city and being a resident, because you have to be both.
But legally, is there anything that would stop us, prevent us from making it consistent across all offices?
No,
Okay,
no,
so we're okay with doing that.
But
Just
that's-
can't write it in.
But in 49, there weren't city managers.
49, there was a city
All right,
manager.
Ms. Morocco.
They were city administrators.
So I'm willing to volunteer to work with the city attorney to come up with a bunch of different definitions that we can present at the next meeting about what a residence is, and come up with different proposals. So if that helps along this dialogue, I think it's great.
Who would work with you?
You'd allow, well, if you want somebody else
Yes.
to come on board, great. Mark?
I wouldn't have the time personally.
Okay.
This month I'm pretty much tied up most days.
It may be helpful if the two attorneys from District 5,
One of them.
One of us,
one of the two.
both
yeah,
of you are.
one of us will work with you.
Okay.
Volunteering member wonder.
Sorry for volunteering, but at least one of the members from,
Don't want to volunteer.
How many attorneys
Okay,
do that?
but only for residency.
We deal with residency and eligibility and not moral turpitude.
But what you're volunteering for is only the residency aspect of it, is what you said.
Yeah, because the moral turpitude, I think, is case law stuff that's out
Yeah,
there.
and I'll just, for the next time, I'll bring you the cases so that you can look at it. And then you can make a determination, hey, we looked at it, we can't do better than case law. It's clear enough. And then residency we'll put into it, and then I'll bring I'll do research in terms of, we can present it as part, the other charter cities, and then I'll do research on the minimums and maximums that courts have either found permissible or unconstitutional.
Okay. And how about the aspect of changing from 30 days to 1 year?
That's
there-
part of the minimum or maximum he's talking
Yeah,
about.
that's all I'm saying. I need to do research on.
Okay.
And I'll bring it back to all of you, and then if you decide, that you want to set up a committee to work on that, we will. But this was the one thing I didn't have not researched yet, other than as I came across it in looking at residency.
I just want to mention also that the county considers you cannot live in a commercial building. You are not a voter.
Actually,
They will actually, if you actually put your residence as a business, they will actually know which ones those are businesses, and they will remove you.
As the city of Vernon did that.
Yeah, so that's one thing. And then also, they've mentioned that, if you live in your car, you're a registered voter.
You are.
Just to give you an idea.
And so that was the idea from the last page, in terms of there may be, but I can't say, differences between how the courts will look at residency if you're indigent versus residency if you're not indigent. So that is unclear and needs, further, I need to do further legal research, but it wasn't clear that, hey, it has to be legal residence, or it doesn't have to be. We don't know, and it may matter on whether you're indigent or not.
What if you have two homes, like one's in Huntington Beach and one's in Redondo? How does that work, where you spend most time? My neighbor is that way, at the house.
Okay,
next to me.
so for purposes, which one did you live in first?
The Huntington Beach one. So they bought the house next to me afterwards, so.
Okay, so then you have to look at what point did the act of having the Redondo Beach one and the intent for that to be your residence. But the problem for us right now, we don't know how to define residence. So like if it's if it's abode and, if residence equals abode and elector, then it would mean it has to be where you're registered to vote. Right now, registration to vote is just an indication under what the courts have looked at and the AG opinions have said, what you look at. But it's, whether you own property or not. There are a lot, do you have utility bills at the Redondo Beach one? So, but it would be different if you had the Redondo Beach first and then bought the Huntington Beach. Did you ever intend to make that your residence?
But as we discovered, if you change your address with the postal service, that changes the structure. Because now the county believes that you are at the address where you're receiving your mail.
It does, for appearances, it doesn't under our charter, because our charter
Right.
doesn't have the requirement. But our charter could have the requirement, in the future, if you recommend it to the council and the council approves it, it could have the requirement of both abode and being an elector throughout the
Maintaining?
term of office.
Yeah.
Right.
So that
Well,
begs the question of what if there was an error that tripped it
Yeah,
out?
that was
That's
just
what
about
this
to
is
say. And so I wouldn't use maintain because, what happens if there's an error? I know I had a grandmother who showed up to vote, was religiously voted in every election, and boy, she became unhappy when they wouldn't let her vote. She had to cast a provisional ballot, and it was just an error by the county recorder. So you'll have to, I think it will be remain elector instead of maintain, because it includes an intent. Or we could put language in there if well, I don't want to compose off the top of my head, but, like an error by, it has to be a deliberate action by the.
Reasonable intent or.
Yeah, just we have to have something where it's clear that it was due to the candidate's actions, not the registrar. So for example, like the problem with Maintain, I think during the special election, there were people who showed up to vote where the registrar said, you're not voting. And they never left their residence. They always maintained their residence. And it was because they hadn't voted in many years, or it was because, in that case, it was mail was returned.
They didn't go through their mailbox.
They literally let the mailbox overflow.
Is there an automatic
it was
kick
sent
out if
back
you
to the
don't vote?
registrar.
Went back to the registered voters,
Yes.
and they considered them inactive.
Right.
So they did
And
not
what is
receive
that?
ballot.
What is that time period, do you know?
I think he was.
It's pretty
it was in
fast.
June,
It's pretty
the
fast.
June election, and then in October, he didn't get a ballot.
You get yellow carded.
But he actually, he came in, we actually had inactive voters on our, and we could have called the county. And so once he received a ballot, so we changed it to an active voter because he verified that he lives where he lives. And we were able to give him a ballot. And then once we did that, the county automatically considered him active.
So it's immediately curable. You just have to know to cure it.
Right, but
Yes.
in the charter, we want to make certain that it's a deliberate, act and intent by
You
the
could-
elected official. You don't want someone to show up and be kicked out of office because something that the registrar did
Yeah.
unbeknownst to that
But you could
elected
call
official.
changing your address for mail delivery a deliberate act.
But it doesn't have to do with what your residence is. So,
I agree, it gets difficult.
It's a lot going on.
so
I live here, but I'm not getting my mail here.
as I said, you define it and it will really help future council
Your
people
definitions.
and the,
You can have a different mailing address.
yeah.
But this
Yeah.
wasn't a mailing address, this was actually the residence.
They allow people, let's say, a political figure who doesn't want to put their home address on a registration to use a different mailing address.
Police do that all the time. Police,
You can have confidential. And
Right.
you will not have, any of the.
But that might cause something to get kicked back
Well,
too.
but on your,
No,
on
no,
your,
no,
on your,
we have access to where their address is.
yeah, I was gonna say.
But you don't send the ballot
It's
there.
not public.
But you don't send the ballots there.
No, we send the ballots to them.
To their home address?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely, it's just.
Oh, thank you for
even
clarifying.
if we're requesting.
it's not in
even
the
if
public
it's
record.
requesting, like,
Right.
If as a candidate, you request the information of who got a ballot, you will not receive that information.
Could you,
Go to the public.
could you provide like a summary of the things that trigger things like, because those play into what we're doing.
Right.
And it's good to know what is the legal actions that can happen that we would have to anticipate. I know that's it doesn't have to be perfect, but
Right.
to the best of your knowledge, what are the things, for example, becoming an ineligible voter if you're kicked out automatically because you haven't voted? Are there other things like that, such as, what are the change of addresses things? The commercial property one was one I didn't know. So you can't register to vote at a commercial property?
Actually, that the mayor of Benicia had a FPPC
That's
action
fine,
going on, but
that's the law.
that was commercial, so he was allowed to keep his office.
You can live in a car.
Yeah,
but
do you
not-
have, going back to the commercial,
Which is why
what
I
about
said it
live
was-
work
The
units?
question may be indigency.
As long as it's residential, but it can't be commercial? Oh, interesting, okay.
Well, Eleanor, I think the other thing you mentioned too, on your 460 forms, when you turn them in, you have to have a physical address to have a PAC. So that PAC address would probably be the residence usually. Because I know if you go online to the city website, they just have the addresses redacted. But when you insert or input that information, it has your address on it. It just redacted on if you want to review it on the city website.
I don't know, like, Form 700, you don't have to use your home address.
Right.
Would you advise that we include language that offers an opportunity to cure, to sort of address this inadvertent or unintended kickbacks. I'm thinking in just, I don't know if kickbacks is the right word, but like where you get, kicked off, of the rolls, unintendedly, but.
Those are things that are curable already.
But to specify
Yeah,
that
perhaps,
there's
maybe-
some sort of opportunity to cure before it,
I would need for us to do more research into what the other language is. And it may be that the language can be that, I don't think if you have the elected officials union of act and intent, I don't know that you can cure that. And our language may be sufficient that it wouldn't trigger it if it was some outside entity that did it. But if we can't, if we look at it, or if you look at it and it's like, hey, this could still, someone could say, they've lost their residence, maybe you could put it in language so that they'd be able to cure it.
If I could, I've read through a lot of charters. And for the most part, while some of these things are triggered, they require an action by the city council to actually implement. And that's to me, is where the curing time comes. Because if it does come up, someone can say, well, that's not really what happened, here's what it is. So there is a curing opportunity in most of these situations. None of these that are that are claimed to be automatic are truly automatic, if I'm not mistaken.
It's a little bit of a vague area, and even the AG opinion from 99 assumed without answering whether or not council action was required for the action to be vacant. They had that footnote 4 that raised without answering whether the council people that didn't act when they should have could be removed or prosecuted. And they said, but it's clear that none of this would be necessary if the council had done its job. So I don't know that answer. I think it is better, because it's go to the elected official, to assume that the action has to be taken. And I think you can read that from the AG opinion, because they ruled that the clerk clearly should have been removed and the council should have. And then they left him in office to run, as you mentioned in the last item, another election for which he should have been removed. And so I think the safer answer, though they left it open, is you need that action from the council to declare it vacant. And so that may be enough of a cure period, but I just want to get further along into, this was referred to you on the 17th, and then we had the 12-hour meeting on the 24th. So I want to be able to do additional research on those things and have you all, but that's something certainly we can, either the two of us and you or Mrs. Wonderly can discuss.
So are you telling me that your recovery time has changed over time?
Oh, I used to pull all-nighters all the time when I was in college or law school. I cannot.
Me neither.
I cannot
The
do
way
it.
it's written now in 6.5, his office shall become vacant.
Yep.
So that is an automatic, and require, then there's the
And shall be,
requires both of those,
Two-step process.
right.
but
And
it's
so-
already,
But it's mandatory that they do. So it's not like they can allow you to cure it, but then that flies in the face of what the AG did. Because if they're saying, hey, we're raising the possibility the council can be prosecuted for not doing this or removed for office themselves for, non-performance of their duties, but we're going to leave them in for 2 months to run an election, it makes it seem like that second action is discretionary, even though shall is usually or almost always mandatory. So it's unclear. So I think the better
it's a
one
very
is,
clear ambiguity.
No, it makes you come up with the actual finding by the body that
Right.
says,
That's exactly
yeah,
right.
this is no longer there. And then by having that second shall, you're basically saying, once you make that second shall, you can appoint whoever you want, you call a special election, but you can't take that second step of doing the administrative acts until you actually make that second.
But the first step is automatic.
Yeah, but
By operation of law.
you might have a fundamental right being withheld without a due process event.
I don't want to go into that.
And again, they raised the issue of saying, hey, the council could be prosecuted for not doing what they're required to do. And so it is, hopefully we can remove that with, or you all can remove that with the language that you pass along to the council.
Do we know if the intent of this referral to us was meant to focus on city council, or was it meant to be more of a blanket?
I think I took it as the terms, and the terms are
Everywhere.
That's the one thing that is unanimous for mayor, city council, and the other elected positions. It's those two terms are the same: moral turpitude and conviction of a crime. Conviction of crime of moral turpitude and residency. So I think it's all of them. It's not so much the other, that's why I was saying you may want to, once we get to future agenda topics, you may want to suggest looking at part one of those three sections.
Okay, to summarize then, at this point, we have referrals to staff, meaning that you're going to come back with a little more information on the moral turpitude aspect.
And I'm gonna work with,
On the residency aspect, you're going to work with that. That was a separate, but as for the moral turpitude,
I'm gonna give you a extensive list of crimes that have been declared a crime of moral turpitude or not a crime of moral turpitude. And from that list, that's what I'm going to prepare for you. You can decide, do we need to weigh into it? And if we can weigh into it, can we do any better than this?
so that's a first referral to staff,
Right.
and you can come back with that at the next meeting.
You may need to refine that also, because there may be moral turpitude if you're in public office, which is different than moral turpitude if you're just a regular person on the street.
I'll look to see if there's any moral turpitude in the AG opinions regarding that. They almost all were things like residency, but I will definitely look at that.
Okay, and then the second referral to staff that I had asked was for the city clerk to, best of your ability, compile a reference list for us of what are the things that trip or trigger deregistration and what is allowed and what is not. For example, the commercial property or being housed in a vehicle versus to include those kind of things. Were there any other referrals to staff? That's the only two.
And I'm going to do research on the court cases that hold what periods are acceptable, what periods are impermissible, and then you can focus on where you might want to narrow it down. And then I'll try and see if I can find anything on whatever your preferred time period is. If it's different, you may decide you want to leave it the 30 days. So.
Okay, and then the third thing would be the Mr. Morocco and
Somebody from.
District 5.
The District 5
work together.
Representative.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. She can work on it.
You can, that's true, you can.
She's part of our group, so.
It can be.
That's fine, because even if Ms. Wonderly wants to do as well, it's not a Brown Act violation.
Right.
So.
But to work with staff on that and bring that back at the next meeting as well. So those are the three. Yes. Those are the three key things.
If it's not, if it's Monday or later.
But yeah, I think there is a definite agreement that these are for us to address and send back recommendations, or at least the recommendation that, yes, we looked at this, we don't recommend a change, and we substantiate it because of this. Okay.
This is a problem a long time in being resolved, and this, I think, would be good to make recommendations to resolve it.
Okay, so I believe with that, we can wrap up now to a motion to continue this item to the next meeting. Any e-comments or Zoom?
Do you want to, that may be fine. We can, never mind, that's fine.
We have no Zoom and we have no e-comments.
Okay, So now a motion to continue this item to the next meeting.
So moved.
Second.
A motion is second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Getting back now, I believe, to I-1.
I'd like to make a point of order, please, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
For item I1, discussion and possible action regarding section 11.1 city treasurer. I am a candidate for this office presently and believe that I might have a financial conflict in discussing this item. So I'm going to recuse myself from the discussions for now and leave the chamber.
Okay. At this point, do we want to get into this, or do we want to just simply continue this item? Is there anyone that has?
Well, if Mr. Solomon's leaving, I think we need to at least move it around so we can get to the part dealing with future agenda item topics, which he may have some input on.
I don't know that we reformatted the agenda in that way.
Yeah, we did not, but
As long as you're not on the dais, you can sit there and come back.
I'll leave the room and then I can come back.
okay.
That would be the best way, the proper way to do it.
Okay, noting that Mr. Solomon has recused himself for this item and has left the chamber. Mr. Pinsler.
Yeah, again, this is another one of those where, with the Moss Adams report, it helps to refine some of the responsibilities of the city treasurer, which, again, this comes not quite as directly, but in terms of specificity in the charter about what a finance director does versus what a city treasurer does. And I believe that the best practices that are listed in here.
In the Moss Adams.
In the Moss Adams report, which is page 12.
Are you talking about the PDF page or just a page in the report itself?
In the report, 12 of in the report. Stated what the best practices of what most city treasurers do. Receivables, payables management, forecasting.
Let's get everyone on that page real quick. Is everybody okay?
Yes.
Ranging long and short-term financing, managing assets and liabilities, bank relationship management. That is, I think, a clear statement of what the city treasurer responsibility ought to be. And that perhaps we should take that recommendation. For example, if you look under the recommendations portions, page 13, page 14, there are some observations of what the assigned duties are and what the recommendation to change them are. And I think we should try to incorporate those into a revisit to what the city treasurer's responsibility ought to be. What this report does is it lists what a financial services department's role ought to be. And I believe in reading through this, that this makes a whole lot of sense relative to what the sort of generic statements that are listed for the city treasurer in our charter do, and they come into conflict. And for example, on observation number 6, which says the city clerk, city treasurer, and financial services have not specified comprehensive reporting requirements. So the finance director should collaborate with to develop reports, but the responsibility falls upon the finance director, financial services department. I think we need to clean this up here to make sure that we understand what it is that a financial services department would be directly responsible for in reporting to the city manager in conjunction with or in association with the city treasurer, as opposed to the city treasurer being the reporting person for that. I think that, again, as with the city clerk, there are roles that have changed over the years, and I think we need to clean those up and to make more succinct the responsibilities of the city treasurer.
Any other comments? Looking at this from I guess a chair's point of view and what we've got on our plate, what I would propose, I agree with what you're saying, first of all, that there's some work and cleanup to do. I would propose that we continue this item to the March meeting. We have time to address it. Let's use the next meeting to really address the things that we've already put on our plate for the next meeting. And after that, come back to this item in March and deal with it then a little more sequentially. We don't have a time crunch for this like we had last fall. But I agree completely. We've got cleanup work to do here. I would propose that we just simplify things a bit in the sequential order, bring it back in March.
One of the things that would happen if we did bring it back in March is that the election will have occurred.
Yes.
And we will, because the incumbent is not running, we will have a new city treasurer.
Yes.
And that would be a good time for the ideas of that person to be incorporated into this.
Absolutely. And that's why I picked March, because the election will not be certified
Okay, so-
yet.
No, well, it won't
It will.
be certified, but we will have the final.
We will have results.
Yeah, the final is,
I believe it'll be certified on
A week before
April
that.
4th.
Right.
but I just wanted to mention regarding, just so we have a timeline, is that for the city, anything to do with city attorney, city clerk, city treasurer, it would be the November 2024
Yes.
election. And so we would call that in August, just so.
And we need to
give
get
you
it
an
to city
idea.
council. So we have
Right,
this year
but I just
for
wanted
sure.
to,
No, it is-
so you guys
yeah.
have an idea, so you're not pushed to the end there. And then anything else, I mean, we could probably put other things on it, because if we're going to pay for that, if they're small, other charter amendments, it's based on the pages. So-
Isn't April 1st the official date of transfer of?
Correct.
people
First week, yeah.
Getting,
Correct. But we'll have the final the week before, if there's no,
Runoffs.
no, there's no runoffs.
But there
We have
can't
no
be, yeah.
runoffs.
there's only two
So we
people.
could have a recount. Don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Depending how close it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a couple of other things too that were not on this agenda that should have been, and we need to put those on the next agenda as well. So I think the next agenda is relatively full. That's why I'd propose
March is fine.
definitely come back to
Plus,
this,
with the change of office, it's good to have
the new perspective.
whoever the likely new city treasurer would be to be able to implement those ideas with them. And they will not have been in office yet, so they will,
Yeah.
but they will be
Yeah. So
treasurers elect.
right. So we will have the final on the 16th and your meeting's on the 23rd.
So that
And
works.
even though you have the final, they haven't been sworn in yet,
Correct. They won't
So
be
they are
sworn in
still
until April
elect.
4th.
April 4th, yeah.
Correct. It's really up to you.
Okay,
So is there a motion to continue this item
I'll move
to
that.
the
I'll
March?
second it.
Motion second to continue to the March regular meeting of this committee. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, it passes 6-0 with one recusal. Do we list that as an suspension or is it a recusal? I'm not sure.
Recused. It's recused.
Okay.
Get him back.
Yeah.
Oh, gee.
Call him back.
You gotta be,
You can hear everything outside.
you gotta do like Mike Webb.
He was not a participant.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's allowed to listen.
Yep.
Oh, and there's no e-comments or Zoom
Oh,
for the
thank you.
record.
Thank you.
I think they got tired from Tuesday's meeting.
Okay, which now brings us to J2, future agenda topics. Ms. Morocco, you had one earlier to start with.
I had a term limit one that I thought was going to be on this agenda, but it may make some sense to put it onto the March agenda since term limits for the city attorney, treasurer, and clerk. That's been trailing the city clerk one. So it may make some sense to put that on the March agenda since that's when we'll deal with the treasurer. And if we do with the city clerk, we're still going to have it come up in March.
That was one of the questions we discussed putting that under continuing items, but we didn't know if, we remember that had been discussed. We didn't know if that was originally you presented as an alternative to making the positions elective. It doesn't make sense to have term limits for a city attorney that is appointed. And so we just wanted to clarify with you, does that...
That was for all the elected officials.
Right, and so we just
that don't
wanted
have
to see if that was in fact continuing, and if you want to continue it to March instead of February, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, that makes sense if we're going to take up the treasurer in March anyway, so.
That's fine for that one. So that one's to March.
And then
And you have that agenda item?
And then you'll have school board on your February. We're going to take the resolution with the school board on January 17th, on January 12th. The mayor right after noon called the special election, and there had been discussions that morning, and I'll work on everything, but the special meeting, I'll work on everything other than the special meeting ceased. So we'll bring that February 10th. And one of the reasons this is on there is to get direction for, is there anything you want to see? You want to inquire if the council, do they want you to look at it? I know you have you don't have to. You can just set it up under the purview you have, but so you can choose not to ask them, but you may want to ask them, would it be helpful if we do this? So.
Just to let you know, I did a study of every city charter in the state. And so I have that report that I can put in as part of that. I don't know what and surprisingly not, we're an outlier. But that's another story. We're an outlier.
In so many ways.
So the recommendation back to us was to evaluate removing school board items in entirety.
Yep.
Which.
Removing it from the charter, and that will be on your next meeting.
Yeah, and from what I've looked at, that is a possibility. We can simply remove everything having to do with school board.
That is correct, and then it would default to the elections code. And so that the whole debate over whether they can be termates, they can't. I'm sorry, I meant the education code. And sometimes the education code trumps city laws if it's a matter of,
Right. I think we're kind of getting into discussion here.
So yeah, just you can remove it, and then it will be up to state law what applies.
Let's put it on the agenda.
I got it.
I don't think we need to get anything clarified from council's given the direction back to us.
Yep.
So we can put that on the February agenda.
Got that.
And then the last item that was also referred back to us by city council was a further evaluation for how the city attorney would promulgate and what would be the specifics of it. It was beyond simply, we recommend that it go to the vote of the people. Then they had asked, okay, what would you recommend? And for us to give options, would it be an appointed person, an appointed firm, the further evaluation that things we had looked at to some extent, but we decided not to put that in there. And that was part of what, in rereading the minutes, it was very well.
Yeah, it was the one referral you made that wasn't an actual charter amendment, didn't have language, didn't have any of that. That will be on February. The city manager, because I'm going to oppose that when it comes to the voters. I don't, well, it's not really recused. I can't really be
Impartial.
I can't be fair because I think it is a fundamental change in our system of checks and balances. And so the city manager is going to choose an outside firm to
Assist us.
consult with you on what your choices are in terms of language you can put. And I believe he's going to bring that to the council, not February 7th, maybe February 10th is when he's shooting. So you'll definitely have, I think it's likely you will have somebody available to discuss it. You may want to put it on the March one in case it gives you more time to make certain the attorney or firm is available to you.
I would propose we go ahead and put it on February. There's things we can still discuss and preemptively, and then when the outside counsel does become available, we continue with that. So.
Okay.
To put that one, further discussion on the city attorney on the February. Any other future agenda topics?
And that includes full-time, part-time
Wait,
as well?
just,
I had also the emergency ordinance. I think that was brought up.
No, I
Yeah,
thought we
dealt with it the
discussed.
last time and.
Yeah, I thought we
I thought I
discussed
had
that. The ordinance was, and the reason we didn't put it on tonight, so that was in the charter, it only deals with an urgency ordinance, being able to pass something
not an
without.
emergency.
Right, and I talked to the city manager if you want to discuss whether it should be in the charter, a process for dealing with emergencies like the emergency council and everything else that's currently in the muni code. And he's not available this night. So if you want to put it on a future agenda, he'll be present. If it's been dealt with, then we don't have to put it on.
I thought it was dealt with at the last meeting.
I thought so too. that we had
So
come
did
to
I, but
conclusion.
I just, yeah. There were two that we were not certain of.
I was
The one,
surprised
the
to see that one.
enumeration and term, and the other was this, so.
That was on the minutes that I said I pushed back and sent back, but it said to move it forward. So
Yes,
that's fine.
correct. And so that's why we had those two questions.
Okay, so
Do we
we resolved that.
Well, we discussed it and clarified it, and that was all that was necessary to do.
Okay.
Any other future agenda items?
Do we want to have a discussion about the vacancies, leaves, and absences that we brought up earlier in 10.2 for 30 days? And the number of meetings and what the intent was beforehand and what perhaps we would want to at least be able to discuss if we want to leave it as it is or change some part of that to bring it up to date?
That's true, because if it's 4 meetings, it's different now than it was before. And if someone attends a meeting outside of the city, which is more capable now than it used to be, does that count as a present or an absence?
President, if
I know,
yeah,
but you could do that forever if you wanted to.
No, not under the changes.
well, I think you,
Changes to the
You could.
Brown Act.
no, so
It's limited now.
No, I'm talking about someone who attends the meeting. They're on a trip somewhere, so they attend the meeting.
as long as it's allowed under the Brown Act, you could
Right.
theoretically, is what he's saying.
But they can
And
do that
so-
all the time. I mean, if you're,
So
You're constantly traveling.
if you want to have the discussion, do you want to look at the mayor requirements? Do you want to look at the other elected officials? And do you want to look at the city council, the 4 meetings for the other electeds, you can't leave the state for more than 30 days? Do you want to look at that and discuss it? So I suggested when Mr. Solomon brought it up, it may be something that you want to discuss. If you don't,
I think it's
that's
an
fine.
urgent thing. We could talk about it in April, not an urgency, but I would propose the one-step process of saying, let's talk about this at a future meeting, and that future meeting maybe being in April. So we haven't really talked about the one-step versus the two-step that we had been using.
So this is a way to have a one-step that's compliant with the Brown Act. You can actually have a discussion like this about them. You can't do it under the two-step process where you can have a full, you can't have a discussion beyond, I want to talk about it. So that's why this agenda item is on here. So I would urge you to, everything you're thinking about, now is the time to have a one-step process.
Yeah, in the Brown Act, though, isn't it legislative body members' right to place things on the agenda?
But you can't have an in-depth discussion about
We've had
why.
this discussion before.
You have the right to have a brief discussion of, I'd like to push issue A on the discussion. And the council can vote whether to put, or the legislative body can vote whether to put it on. But what you can't have, and what you can right now, is, have a
We did one.
fuller discussion.
We did for 8 years.
I thought the Brown Act was written such that you have, as a member of a legislative body, you have that right to place items on the agenda.
That's two different issues. The legislative body can put it on the
No, as a
discussion.
member, though. Okay.
Oh,
Well, see, this is separate, it's a separate argument. So the power was with the council, not an individual member under our charter.
Under our charter.
Correct.
But under the Brown Act,
What's okay is different than what you're empowered to do.
And the accepted rules of order, which is another whole story.
But we don't have accepted rules or
but purely
order.
under the Brown Act.
It would be permissible, but you're not granted the authority as an individual council member under the charter.
Okay. That was my clarification, but the Brown Act itself,
It'd be okay. That's why the council can vote. Normally, you can't vote on something that's not on the agenda. The council can vote whether or not, or the legislative body can vote whether or not to put something on.
understood.
And the one step versus two step is how,
And where's that prescribed for the council? Is that,
that's a longer discussion. I'm
Okay,
happy to
never mind.
have with you.
We've been having this discussion for 12 years.
Yes, exactly.
recall my
Hey, you know
question.
what? What you may want to, what you may now want to discuss in the future is putting that
Yes.
in the council, because it's silent as to that. And if you
Silent.
default to everything that's silent is a power of the council, not the individual council member. So you may want to make future city attorneys really happy and future council people really happy to allow them to do so. The downside to it is if you have one council person who wants to discuss a lot of things that none of the others want to discuss, every meeting can go till 4:30.
Unless, excuse me, but unless you follow a rule by saying, is there a motion? And if there is no motion, then that's things gone.
So we can have this discussion, I think it would be good
I do
to
too.
have this discussion as an agenda topic.
Yes, I
For
would
this
agree.
body.
I would agree with that.
Did we agree to have the discussion about the other topic?
Right.
We agreed to have a discussion about discussions.
Yeah, the discussion about the vacancies and absences for the mayor and council members and other elected officials.
So he's indicating you didn't take a vote
Right.
to place it on. That would be a good idea.
You just talked about it, but no vote.
I mean, we used to have the ability of the public to pull items off the agenda, off the consent calendar.
The public doesn't have the ability to do it. You can, as a council member, can say, hey, I want every member of the public to know I'm going to pull the item. If
That
you
wasn't
speak
what
to it.
happened.
I know, but that wasn't. There's a difference between what should happen and what did happen.
But I think the
So
question is right.
procedurally, do we
Should
need to vote?
Yes,
on-
yes.
Procedurally, we need to vote
On just that
on
one
what
item.
Mr. Solomon is
Well, the other items would be
proposing.
continued or part of other discussions that we've already had.
Yeah,
This would be a new item.
This would be a new item, and then potentially the second would be a new
Okay.
item.
Motion is second on that item.
Second.
You had the motion?
I had the motion.
The motion already
All right.
seconded.
You're good? You have those two? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, passes unanimously.
Do you want to put on
Procedure.
the count, whether, just the specific procedure, whether an individual, how items get placed on the agenda?
I would make that motion.
I will second that motion.
I would support that.
I would vote that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now, did we pick a time for that, though?
Not yet.
Not yet.
We just said future agenda.
Right.
So noting that should we put it to April, just to have it assigned to one?
It's a good idea to set an expectation.
Right.
Yeah.
That's fine.
When are we doing, April?
April. We can always continue it, but let's have it so it doesn't get lost in the weeds. Are we complete for future agenda topics at this time?
Actually, I have a couple. So one of the things is 19.5, which is our legal ads contract. So we have to do that every year. And so I would like it be every 3 years so that we're not constantly going through this bid process every time. It just seems every year it's a lot of work.
This is for legal.
Legal ads, which means aren't paper, the newspapers. Right now, it's only the Easy Reader. We send it out to LA Times, Beach Reporter, and Easy Reader. And right now, Easy Reader is the only one providing us the bid.
So to consider changes to Article 9, Section 19.5 of Article 19.
What's typically the value of that contract?
Well, I think the reason they put it in there was because of council, because it's the paper, based on what I was looking from the past.
Could we discuss as part of that whether or not they have to be in newspapers or on other circulars?
That's another artifact.
That's another thing.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
and
bring
matter
up
of fact,
next.
this was amended in 2003 because the one that used to say limited us to
Right, publish.
the Easy Reader because it had to be published in Redondo, and they bought the rights of the one historic newspaper that had been published in Redondo, and therefore it limited. So even though the city could pay less for the legal notices, they were mandated to use this. That was removed by the voters in a 2003 amendment. You could just say, we want to review it, 19.5.
But we still have to publish in a,
I haven't looked at it, so I don't know.
And that brings up the other.
They'll have to use a paper.
Brings up
but
electronics.
Right now,
access to it.
yes. So that's
because
the
not everybody
other
has the
question I
internet
have. The other is the ordinance publication, which is 19.15, which is we have to publish it in the paper.
Right.
And the last ordinance was $10,000.
19.15?
It's
No.
ordinance.
1915, yes, 19.15.
It's an ordinance, not a charter.
okay.
It's an ordinance, just ordinances. We have to publish that in the paper.
You can't do a summary?
So
The full thing has literally
Whole
every
thing,
single
it can't
page
be a
has-
summary?
Wait, where is this?
19.15.
You're in the ordinance.
Not in the charter, in the.
Ordinance.
That really
Charter.
wouldn't be for the Charter Review Committee.
Yeah, I would say that shouldn't be under our purview.
That's the charter.
Charter, how can
I don't have a
I don't have
19.15.
1915 either.
Neither do I.
No, this is,
I go to 1911, yeah.
I don't have a 15 in mind.
that's 19.15, the charter. You don't have a
What
19,
page, what?
C-7.
It's actually 9.15, not 19.
Oh, 9.15, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I didn't realize I was saying 19, 9 point.
Yes, okay.
Well, the legal ad is 19.5.
Agreed.
I'm sorry, so 9.15
15.
is the ordinance.
I do have a
Each ordinance
9.15.
shall be published at least once in an official newspaper of said city within 15 days from and after the date of adoption of said ordinance.
Yeah, and we
Right,
could-
so if you want to review those charter review things, then we can look at
and then the
things you
thing
can
with
put in,
publishing.
whether a summary would be sufficient.
Right,
And the question then would be, is electronic considered publishing?
that was the other thing, is that I think would be great to, be able to look at all the areas that say publishing, and to be able to look at whether we can put it on the website or some other method. So that was my other.
But is state law?
We're getting
Okay, we
into
can't,
the.
we're getting into, okay.
into the
So-
Yeah, I don't want to get
And one
into,
of,
I
and
just,
one of
I'm
us
just
would have to
recommending.
make that referral.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we would need to have a definition of what publishing means.
Okay, so is there a motion to review sections 19.5 and 9.15 at a future date, which I'm open to suggestions?
As what was being, Eleanor was saying, any place the word publishing is, and we may find it elsewhere in here. So if we could just extend it to whenever publishing is mentioned, I know we should visit that.
Yeah, I
So,
can-
like, if we could revise your motion.
Is that your motion?
Yeah, friendly amendment is accepted to revise it to be anywhere in the charter that mentions published or publishing,
Published.
or any derivative of the word publish. Okay. At May meeting,
Yeah, we can do May.
there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. All in favor? Aye. Passes. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Very good. Thank you. Any other future agenda topics? Hearing none.
If I could we move this?
No, you can't. Bob.
Why is it always the councilman from 4?
We put this item on every agenda so that if we come up with something, we at least have it.
That's a good idea.
Future, just have it as part of future agendas, just in case we come up with other ones.
The only problem with it is you had, like last time, you had a lot of items and then you didn't necessarily discuss them. And if you're a member of the public, you don't know which one are they really going to talk about in depth. So that's just something to consider in terms of if the public doesn't care about 9 of the items, but cares a great deal about the 10th and it's on the agenda, you know, they don't know whether you're going to have an in-depth discussion or.
No, I was mistaken. What this item said is, what do we want on future agendas?
Right.
So rather than have it as a referral.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Oh, yes.
Item on there that says,
Yep, absolutely.
here's an opportunity to, if you
Right.
read through the charter, had nothing to do and read through the charter one night and discovered something that was
So you want to continue this item to every meeting?
every meeting.
This particular item, future agenda
To have it
topics?
so that we,
I thought it was automatically.
no, it's
on.
not.
Okay.
No, it's not.
Then so noted.
Yeah,
Make a motion.
it had been on your first one, I think.
My
and
motion.
That was, yeah.
Second.
The motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So that is to continue item J2 to all future agendas.
Another's on that one.
Okay.
I was not aware of that one. Member items and referrals to staff. Any further from beyond what we had already discussed?
So can we go over the dates of our next sets of meetings? I mean, I know February 23rd is the next one. I just want to,
23rd is February 23rd, and then March 23rd. And then April 27th. And May 25th,
thank you.
February 23rd, it's a Thursday.
and June 22nd. So that gives you half.
26th.
What?
No, 23rd would be the February.
Yep.
Thursday is the 23rd.
23rd. February, March is the 23rd.
Can I ask a question? Because Wayne, you said you didn't get a notification of the agenda.
No, I'd asked for it. I guess the person that normally sends it out didn't send it. And then I didn't know Joe wasn't attending tonight. So.
Yeah, I didn't get it either.
So the
Okay, I'll
alternates
have to-
aren't getting, they should get it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, we had been
We had
getting.
someone was on vacation, so that probably was slipped. And of course.
So normally, members and alternates would receive.
Right.
We-
No, I
Yeah, I
agree.
had been getting it, but we didn't get it.
Just-
for
Yeah.
This is just the one time I didn't get it.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, the chief deputy ended up in that meeting for 12 hours, so I think. Might have forgotten. Sorry about that. We'll make
The
sure.
Wednesday city council meeting.
Yeah.
I could get
So-
future agenda.
Sorry about that.
I do remember a
Wednesday.
meeting where we used to have closed session after. And we used to watch the sun come up.
Okay. With that, I will entertain a
I would
motion.
just like, that was one of my first suggestions at city attorney, because good decisions are not made after 2 AM. And closed session are some of the most important things that you deal with. So we have it both in case it has to trail over.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Morocco has made that motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None. Adjourned at 9:50.